We're on.
Marty, you've been drinking? What? Really?
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everybody out there. Welcome. It is another Friday night, and that means it's time for some heavy metallurgy. I'm Alan from Let's Talk Metal. I'm here with my co-host, Marty Worm. Marty, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a long
day.
and a really busy week, but yeah, looking forward to just taking it easy for a while, having some fun, and talking some heavy metal stuff. And of course, we wouldn't be doing that without our guest, Matt from the Dark Path channel. Matt, how are you tonight?
Bald. How are you guys doing?
Bald.
Not bald, just tired, but
Be one of us. Be one of us, Alan.
Give me a couple more years. I'm get there, I'm sure.
You're good. You're good. You're gonna make it. You're gonna make it to the end.
You never know. But yes, I am happy. Little things in life make us happy during the week. I got this super silly Diplodocus shirt. It's so dumb, but I love it so much. So
I almost ordered one of those for myself too, but I missed the pre-order for the vinyl for that record because I was too busy at work that day, and I was going to order both of them. And then, a couple days went by. I was like, yeah, was I really ever going to wear that shirt? Probably every single day. So it's a good thing I didn't buy.
I was really like, I rarely buy shirts anymore just because, I don't get much of an opportunity to wear them, and they pile up pretty quickly. But this one,
hey, Diplodocus is awesome, and everyone needs to listen to them. How about instead of talking about whatever we're talking about tonight, we just talk about Diplodocus and this fantastic Halloween album.
Gonna switch
8 hours straight. What do you think, Alan? Let's do it.
Okay, so Marty, kick him off the stream, and we'll get back to that awesome scanner shirt you're wearing. So, Matt, it was great seeing you. Enjoy your weekend. We'll never speak again.
So why are we here, Alan? Why are we here?
Tonight we are here to not just talk about Diplodocus and Halloween albums that should not exist. We're here to talk about one of the most influential heavy metal record labels of the past, well, almost going on 30 years at this point, Century Media. If you've listened to heavy metal for any length of time and paid attention to anything beyond just, the few, more commercial friendly groups, you've bought records on Century Media. There's no way you've avoided it. Huge label. They've released tons and tons of stuff over the decades. They've had a lot of big name bands on, and a lot of bands that have been on their label and have a very long catalog of really high quality releases. So tonight we're each going to go through and talk about some of our favorite releases that they have done. And I want to start off right away saying, Matt, I feel this is a topic that is so in your personal wheelhouse with this particular label. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. I was actually going to dedicate an episode of my own channel to Century Media releases because they are very important to my upbringing and awakening with underground metal. For me, I can trace it all back to Century Media, so that's why I'm looking forward to this one. So,
good deal. And Marty, what's your kind of relationship with Century Media?
Well, I would agree with Matt. I mean, it is, they're a big label for the U.S. and their releases were easy to get. And they were very influential in my development, along with early Metal Blade releases, Noise Records, Road Racer, Nuclear Blast. I mean, they all have a huge part in what I am today as a musical aficionado. I almost said appreciator, but yeah, I mean, they were one of the early labels that really turned me on to some amazing stuff and stuff that still influences me today. And I will say the longevity of the label, and in researching for this stream, I found a list on Discogs of Century Media releases, and it's a testament to the label that their main band stayed with them for so long. I don't know if it was just because of the contract that they signed, 10 album contract. I have no idea, but a lot of their cornerstones of the label stayed with them for a long time put out a lot of records.
Oh yeah.
And
they were one of the more fair and just labels out there. You know, they weren't really out there to screw over the artist or rip off the artist in a lot of cases. You don't really hear a lot of stories about bands being unhappy with Century Media Records, at least in the heyday. It might be different today now that they're owned by Sony, but you know, back in the heyday, I never heard anybody complain about them. But you always hear bad stories about Metal Blade, about Noise, about Earache, about Roadrunner, about everybody, but you never hear that many bad stories about Century Media.
Exactly. The fact that they would allow their artists to grow and change. I mean, look at a band like Sentence.
They encouraged it. They encouraged it. So.
A band like Sentence, their first 4 albums sounded completely different from each other, and they kept on changing, and you know, they stayed with the label until they ended. So I mean, it's obviously it was a encouraging atmosphere going on within the boardroom of that place, which is, you know, hats off to them for doing that.
Yeah,
and I think one thing that really set Century Media apart from everybody else too is they never really had that cult of personality that a lot of record labels tend to get, where like, you know, like everything that was signed to Moonfog sounded like a Moonfog band. Like they all sounded the same. Everything signed to Fat Records sounds exactly like, you know, everybody else. You know, to a certain extent, you could probably say that about Noise too. I mean, they catered to specific things, whereas Century Media, you look at their catalog and it's just so all over the place. I mean, they signed everything, and really the only other label that I think was doing that at the time was maybe Nuclear Blast, but I think Century Media really tried to sign bands that were across the field, you know. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't sign them themselves, they licensed, you know, other things and brought it in. So
yep.
I think that's a testament to why Century Media has had such longevity and still has a lot of fans, is just because of that. You know, they cover everything, you know, like Hell's Headbangers, for example. You listen to one Hell's Headbangers band, you heard them all, you know.
Pretty much.
People that love a Hell's Headbangers band are going to love everything on Hell's Headbangers. You know, that's not how it is with Century Media.
Yep.
You could say the same thing about Nuclear War now too, but I'm not trying to shit talk those labels. I'm just saying, as an example of what I mean. Mm-hmm. You know, Century Media was just all encompassing. So
yeah, no, those are all good points. Century Media coming along in the late '80s, I get the sense they were kind of getting up and running at a point where it was no longer going to work to be one of these kind of shady record labels, you know, with somebody who's going to be writing up sketchy contracts and screwing over bands. I think the industry was moving past the point where you could get away with that stuff by then. So, yeah, and they have always had a good reputation. And you're absolutely right, Matt. They have a really diverse catalog. I think most people still think of Century Media associating them with, you know, quote unquote more extreme metal bands, but they really run the gambit, and I hope that we're going to see that tonight as we show off.
We're going to prove my point, all three of us. I'm pretty sure, because it's impossible. So. It's impossible not to.
Mm-hmm. So I think you're absolutely right. And something else you mentioned that is a good point. They also did a lot of licensing. That was one thing that tripped me up a little bit in looking for albums to show tonight. Was I'd pull something, you know, that I have on Century Media, but then when I looked at it more closely, it's like, oh, wait, this was actually licensed from Spine Farm. This was actually licensed from another label. It's like, well, those are Century Media releases. I mean, for anyone in the U.S., that's how you got those albums.
Yeah.
But technically, you know, the band may not have been signed to Century Media. And we'll touch on some of those releases later. We may have some mixed in along the way. It's a little hard to avoid, harder than we thought at first. But we'll definitely talk about some of that towards the end tonight, and talk about, because there's also the Century Black imprint. And Matt, I know you want to mention that for sure.
Well, I wanted to just throw a disclaimer out there. I know people are going to be like, "Why aren't you talking about album and band X?" Well, if it was a licensed Century Black title, it's not technically a Century Media release per se. Mm-hmm. We'll touch upon that stuff later, but I don't want to see a bunch of people in the comments saying, "Where's Emperor? Oh, why aren't you talking about Emperor?"
Yeah, that is a good comment. And if we may show
people write it in.
Yeah, we may show one that is licensed by accident, be like, oh, so if someone in the comments catches him, is like, oh, wait, technically that was on Avant-Garde or something. It's like,
well, that guy can go fuck himself.
It is a little bit of a tricky catalog because they've done so many things from so many things. And that probably also has been a big part of their success. They did a really good job picking things from overseas to release in other territories. It's not just the U.S. they did that. I noticed they had some things that were released in South America through Century Media, but were on other labels in the U.S. that other labels had the license into them. So, yeah, Century Media really was looking at what territories they could release things in and did that really well.
There was also a spell where they were reissuing a lot of combat, out-of-date, out-of-print combat releases there for a while.
They re-released like all the Death catalog at one point and other things.
The old thrash stuff, Possessed. I mean, a lot of that stuff. And so it's clear whoever was running the show over there had their finger on the pulse of what was going on, what needed to be reissued, what needed to see a release in the U.S. And that, that tells me it was a label run by fans, not just figureheads, or bean counters, Very good.
And I remember even back in the day when I wrote a fanzine, it was really easy to get in touch with people at Century Media and get on their mailing list. I mean, you didn't even really have to prove to them that you were doing a fanzine. You just call them up and be like, "Hey, I've got a fanzine. Send me some stuff." And be like, "All right, cool. Who do you want to interview?" And they were really hands-on with helping you interview people and setting up interviews. Like they were one of the easiest labels that I dealt with on that side of things a million years ago.
Me too. Yep. They were always easy. And at the shows, they'd have a guy there who knew who you were, and they were very nice and accommodating, and they're just good people.
Yep. Yeah, they were accessible.
Let's get into it.
Let's do. You said they were accessible, and their releases were accessible, and let's get into it. So, as usual, Matt, we'll start with you as the guest, and I'll go second, and then Mr. Marty will round things out before we go back to the top of the batting order.
Well, I'm going to start with the obvious one for me, just to get it out of the way. One of the albums that's the most influential for where I went in music, it has to be Samael with Ceremony of Opposites. Now, my vinyl copy is terrible. It's this.
I hate that. I hate they did that for a spell.
Series. Yeah. Oh, it's so bad. But it's easier to show a record on these things and give you a big glare just to be super annoying. There you go. Yeah. But this album right here, I could have just as easily picked any of the Samael records that were released on Century Media. But out of all of them, this is always the one I listen to the most. It's their best one. This is the one that really, really opened the doors for me with a lot of black metal. And because of that, I have to go with Ceremony of Opposites. I think it's the best Samael album. And what do you guys think?
I would agree 100%.
I've got it in the stack too. I'm not going to go digging for it.
Yep. Yeah, it was the first one I heard by them, and to this day, I think it's their best. It still has that creepy black metal vibe from their earlier stuff, but it works in the early phases of their electronics so well. It's got great production. The track order is just flows from one track to the next so well.
Spot on. It's a 10 out of 10 record. I mean,
yeah.
I get when people say they like Blood Ritual better. I mean, Blood Ritual is a great album. That's
really dark vibe on that.
Yeah, very unique sound on it. Yeah.
But I could have easily picked it,
Yeah, with that album, they developed a lot from Blood Ritual. They added more layers to it. They got the symphonic nature of it with the keyboards. The songwriting on it is really great. It's like they jumped. There was a huge jump in songwriting between Blood Ritual to Ceremony, and very dark. And there's even times where the riffs were a little groovy. I mean, you could tell that they weren't just confined to a black metal aesthetic, where they started off as kind of a Hellhammer appreciating band creatively. They expanded a lot, and that album, great atmosphere. I've spun that thing hundreds of times over the years for sure.
Yeah. It was one of the albums that not only got me into Samael, it was one of the earlier black metal albums I heard. It really helped get me interested in black metal. I missed the first few years of black metal. Just nobody was paying any attention to Norway or Sweden where I was at the time. But yeah, the college radio station started playing Ceremony of Opposites. Let's see, that came out in 94. They started playing it in maybe late 94 or early 95. And yeah, it clicked with me instantly. I'm just like, that is really cool sounding. I got to check that one out. And from there, they started getting more and more black metal into their rotation. So I started to pick up on more of the bands. But that was one of the first ones that really clicked and made me want to hear more.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they're still one of my favorite bands to this day. I mean, I love pretty much every album Samael's done, but the one I've listened to the most is Ceremony. So unapologetic Samael fan right here.
They made a huge change on Passage. I ended up really liking Passage, but you know, if your drummer tells you, look, I mean, this happened with Manila Road too. The drummer says, look, I want to program drums and then just add percussion. That'd be a conversation that I would veto right off the bat. I mean, it totally, you know, not having that organic element, you know, that primal influence in their sound, it certainly cleaned them up a lot. It streamlined their sound. It, I don't know. From a songwriting perspective, I think it took away a little of the spontaneity that may have happened on the albums that came before it. But, you know,
I talked about that album a little bit in the Samael deep dive I did a while back. I think they made a very clear and focused decision to do that for Passage, because Passage, they wanted, in my mind, they wanted to make an album that sounds like it came from a dead world or a dead place.
Yeah.
And that's what that album sounds like without the percussion, like the real drums added to it. You know, it sounds very mechanical. It sounds very mechanized. It doesn't sound alive the same way that Ceremony of Opposites and Blood Ritual does. And I think they did that on purpose for that record. And I think they probably just really enjoyed that sound, and that's why they stuck with it and never really went back to having drums. I mean,
it was probably cheaper in the studio too.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, they still play drums live a little bit. You know, he'll get in there and he'll play drums on certain songs, but you know, I don't mind that they use a drum machine. It doesn't really bother me at all.
All right, Mr. Allen, what you got?
All right, I'm also going to start with a pretty obvious one, but why not? It's got to be mentioned in the context of Century Media, and Marty already alluded to the band. Sentenced. And Amok.
That's all right. I've talked about him plenty.
Yeah, as you mentioned, you know, this band, kind of like Samael, they very rapidly evolved over the course of their first 3 to 4 albums. None of them sound alike. And you know, this was a pretty polarizing album to a lot of folks when it came out. A lot of people wanted to hear another version of North From Here, which was a great album. You know, really nice sort of, you know, Black and Death outtake. And this one's very different. This goes more almost in sort of a death and roll direction instead, but it's still a very fierce album, very angry. The songs are very varied from one another. There's still a lot of aggression and a lot of power throughout the album, but it can also quiet down a little bit when it needs to
Great songwriting.
So yeah, it's really good. It was the band's last one, of course, with Jarva, and in my opinion, it was really the last good Sentenced album. I never got into the stuff they did after this. I thought they got very samey and very the sort of, you know, goth rock, more not commercial in a radio friendly sense, but it was much more digestible for a wider audience after this, and it just didn't click with me. But yeah, this is when I still come back to decades later and play it, and yeah, it's still a beast of an album and has held up really well over time.
Oh, never gets old.
I need to get a copy of that. I don't own a copy of that one anymore, unfortunately.
But for me, the songwriting and, you know, Jarva's obvious appreciation for Carl McCoy from Fields of the Nephilim gives that a very unique spin. You know, it's the, you know, I want to say death and roll. It's like goth rock type shit. I don't know. It's just a weird amalgamation of styles, and
Mhm.
the songwriting is so good. I mean, even when the lyrics are tongue in cheek and being silly, the songs are just so memorable. And even after all these years, the harmonies and stuff are so well written. It just doesn't expire for me. Whenever I listen to a sentence, this is the album I grab. And when I listen to it probably 3 or 4 times before I put it away. You know,
I listen to North from Here very regularly too. I love the way they did that album, but it sounds like 2 different bands.
oh, it's completely all 3 of the first 4 albums sound like different bands. It's amazing, really.
All right, Marty, what have you got for your first display piece tonight?
First of all, I just want to say to the 45 to 50 people that have already stopped by, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It means a lot to us that you're spending your time watching us old bastards prattle on. But for me, I really have to start to where this whole thing started for me, and that would be the Eyes of Death compilation. You know, being pre-internet, compilations really had a huge place in my musical development, whether it's Metal Blade or Noise Records or Nuclear Blast or Relapse Records. I mean, this was a way to really showcase, this is really a way to showcase what the label has to offer. And for the most part, if you're not on the internet searching, for bands, I mean, I think all of us did this. I mean, if I found bands that I liked on Century Media, I would tend to go through and just buy whatever. That would be a deciding factor for me. If it had Noise Records on it, I'm buying it. If it had Metal Blade Records on it, I'm buying it. Road Racer, I'm buying it. Of course, as things went on and labels started to change a little bit, that became more of a loose cannon. But this, to me, is a huge, huge, huge part of my growing with death metal. I mean, I'm a child of the thrash era, and as this death metal stuff started coming through, this album, this compilation clicked really heavily with me. It's got Unleashed, Asfix, Tiamat, Morgoth, Grave, and Loud Blast on it. Some of the bands, I don't know, they're all went on to, I don't know if Loud Blast was a straight up Century Media band here in the US, but they were over in Europe, I guess. But this, to me, is huge in the Century Media pantheon. And that's where I wanted to start.
That's a good place to start, and it's a good reflection on, the early and mid '90s. You had so many very influential compilations coming out of labels like Relapse and Century Media, and they were a big gateway for people to check out a lot of these bands that these labels were picking up. Yeah, again, it's been mentioned before on other streams and stuff that the age of the compilation is kind of come and gone, but back then those things were just like gold for checking out so many bands for a good price, and you could then quickly follow up on the ones that really caught your attention. So yeah, it's very appropriate to have one of the Century Media comps at the top of the list. Absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Matt, you're back.
Well, I'm going to piggyback right off of you, Marty, and go to where I started for the most part, and it was a compilation as well. For me, it was with Identity 3D. Now, this was a comp, they were cheap as hell. I mean, $3.98.
That's good marketing.
You could not pass this up when you're a 16-year-old kid walking through Best Buy trying to find something that you read about in Metal Maniacs and had no idea what it was. You come across this and, oh, great, I can discover 18 bands all at once. That's something that just doesn't happen anymore. But
exactly.
I mean, this is what kicked me off with Century Media. There's a lot of crap on here. Like, I don't care about Stuck Mojo and
I don't know if anybody did.
Turmoil. Like, I don't care about these bands. But this was the first place I heard Sentenced, Moonspell, Samael, Iced Earth, Arcturus, Rotting Christ, I Hate God, Marauder, Nevermore, Strapping Young Lad. Lots of good stuff here. So, and there was also a VHS companion to it, a Declaration of Independence, which I still have, and it still works, and you can actually watch this in its entirety on YouTube. And lots of great music videos on here. It had a lot of the licensed stuff, like you've got Satyricons, Mother North on here, and some other stuff. But these are great. I mean, this is what I cut my teeth on right here. And from here, I went further. And the other thing that was really interesting about Century Media too is all of their CDs always came with a mail order catalog in there. And Century Media was the first label I started ordering stuff through mail order through. And I can thank my stars by getting that through Identity 3D.
Right on.
Yep. Yeah, those are great points about those comps. They were cheap. They were easy to find. And yeah, you're 16 years old. You've got like $20. You can buy 1.5 CDs, and that actually was half a CD. So yeah, you could get one title you'd been interested in and add that, and still have change for the payphones back in the dinosaur era.
they with those comps, they even started to use a really smart marketing strategy of, I think, Rotting Christ, A Dead Poem came with it was a 2 CD set.
Yep.
And it came with a comp, with it, which is fucking genius. You pay one price. You pay one price for a CD and you get 2 things, and you get to hear 15 other bands that, it's great marketing.
Yeah. Yep. I'd forgotten about that, Rotting Christ, but yeah, it sure did.
Stuck Mojo is getting a lot of love in the chat. I think the only people
I didn't think they would, but here we are.
I thought the only people like Stuck Mojo were their moms.
So Matt, about that Chameleons record you were showing earlier, let's re-explore this. Let's
reinvestigate the Chameleon idea here.
Yeah, given a choice, okay, it at least has Michael Kiske on it.
Yeah. I mean, that's not all bad. There's some good stuff on that record.
No, this album rules, but it is not a Century Media release, so we can't talk about it unless we want to torture Alan, and I kind of do.
Actually, Century Media did reissue some some Halloween stuff.
Yep.
Was it this one?
I don't think it was that one.
They reissued the first couple of Darius era albums.
Oh, they did?
At one point, yep. Master of the Rings
they did.
Time of the Oath got maybe even better than Raw all got issued on Century, reissued on Century. They, of course, were not on Century Media to begin with. Right. Mr. Allen. All right. Well, again, there's a lot of hits on Century Media, so the hits shall just keep coming. This is another one of the bands I definitely associate with Matt. Going to pick this particular one from
You bastard.
Maybe you picked a different one. I didn't know which one you would pick.
It was this one.
Oh, okay. Well, we've made.
There was only 2 Psy albums that were released by Century Media, and this is the best one. So
this is one of my favorites in their catalog. There's some gaps in their catalog I have not heard. But yeah, I've always really liked this album. Every Psy album kind of has its own personality, and this one, it's just a very fun and quirky album. It's got a very sort of warm, lively sound to it. I've heard it described as having a very organic sound, which I kind of get. It still has, some of those soundtrack passages and, things like that. But it's, just a very fun, very digestible album. You put it on and it's just, this is really cool sounding. It's got all the Psy weirdness, but it's not as obtuse as some of their albums or as abstract. It's just got a much warmer tone about it. I always thought the color, the crazy color scheme was very appropriate for the music that it contained.
Stephen O'Malley design.
It just always made me feel like I was tripping when I'd listen to that record. Like, it's a perfect album to listen to after eating an unhealthy amount of psychedelic magic mushrooms. So.
Yeah, but it's a happy kind of trip too. It's the fun kind of trip. It's not the freak out paranoid kind of trip.
It wasn't a hell ride. No, it's I'm going to the jazz casino. Let's fucking get busy.
Yeah, it's like you're out with your friends and doing all kinds of crazy shit for the night, and they've obviously got lots of good albums and tons of interesting music, but I always really liked that one just for the overall vibe of the record.
Yep,
Psy is one of those bands that I never could. I have heard some early stuff. It never clicked with me. I don't know what it is, but I know. What are you gonna do?
Matt,
don't talk to Halloween, Marty. Jeez.
Yeah, I don't know,
You're not cool enough for Psy.
Oh, I knew that. Not cool enough is going to be on my headstone.
Their stuff is not always easy to listen to or to get into. It's not. It can be very tough. But
it can be challenging, but it's awesome.
Yeah. Challenging is a good word for the band, but in the good sense.
The payoff is always there when it comes to Psy. So,
indeed. All right, Marty, your turn.
Okay, let me navigate this here. Next up for me, we're going to be going down basically the Century Media comp because it was huge in my development. So we're just going to go with this. Morgoth, The Eternal Fall, and Resurrection Absurd, I want to say. Yep. It's both EPs put on one CD. Morgoth were a German death metal band, and I wish I knew how to properly say his last name. Mark Grue or Mark Grue? I have no idea. But this guy's vocals were some of the grimmest, most ferocious death metal vocals during this era, in my opinion. And I tried really fucking hard to model my own vocal style after him. Of course, I wasn't as good as that. That's why I'm not doing it anymore. But absolutely great, mid-paced, super heavy, really interesting death metal, the old school way where there's riffs and actual songs. And yeah, these guys remain an influence to me today, and this is a good road trip CD for sure. Absolutely killer. Devastating.
Good deal. I don't know that one. I've heard a couple of songs by the band here and there, but never dived into them.
All right, Matt.
Well, I'll piggyback off you. I picked Cursed.
Yep.
Now,
a little more mature, for sure.
Yeah, I like this one a lot, and I could be totally wrong, but to my ears, you know, the singer for this band always sounded like Chuck from Death. And
Yeah.
I had friends of mine, you know, that, you know, weren't really into metal, but, you know, I could get them to listen to Death and, you know, they would like it and they'd want to hear something else, but nothing too crazy like Cannibal Corpse level. And, you know, I would always recommend Morgoth Cursed because this sounded like it was in the same wheelhouse. So to me, I've always really liked this album a lot. And let me know if you can still hear my fan. I turned it down. So
It's definitely better. I mean, it wasn't detrimental to anything, and I don't want you, you know, getting sweaty, but
I'll just open a window and then you can hear the goats and the chickens and everything in my yard instead of the
Awesome.
fan.
Marty loves hearing anything with the word goat in the title. We know that.
you might want to start a new band.
Goat chicken.
Goat chicken. Okay.
I hear their music's pretty foul.
Yeah.
I got my dad joke in. I'm happy.
That was well played, sir. Well played.
Thank you. Oh, back to me already. Good grief. All right. This was a big one for me in the Century Media family. Is Iced Earth. The early Iced Earth albums are all fantastic.
Killer.
Now, of course, you know, Iced Earth these days, there's kind of an asterisk next to the name. Not going to go into that. Let's just say, John, you done fucked up, and everybody knows it.
Fucking moron.
Oh, I'll go there. Fuck Iced Earth and fuck John Schaefer. Continue. Go ahead, continue.
Messed up bad. This album came out 25 years before the fact. So, and for a long time, I considered it the best, or if not the close to the very best album that came out in the entire decade of the 1990s. This album was huge for me. Iced Earth was huge for me over their first three albums. They were a very rare example of a band in the United States playing, you know, very traditional power speed heavy metal during those years when everybody was flocking to the Panteras and Biohazards and White Zombies of the world. Iced Earth was, you know, still, the U.S. still had this one claim, you know, this one tent pole you could, you know, gravitate towards for real fucking heavy metal. And this was the band. You know, first album I still thought was very strong. It's, you know, not the best album in the world, but still, you know, it made a strong statement. Night of the Storm Rider, their second, a really, really excellent album. Could pick that one, but this one for me was the Iced Earth album. It's the first one that had Matt Barlow on vocals. Definitely the best of their first three vocalists, although I like the guys on the first two albums as well. And this album, again, it is a very angry sounding album. I remember reading interviews and stuff with band members at the time, and you could tell they were very pissed off and fed up with the lack of attention they were getting in the U.S. market. That they had released 2 albums on this label with good visibility, and nobody in their own country knew who the hell they were, and they were really sick and fed up with the situation. And you can feel that anger and frustration in a lot of these songs, that they were really putting a lot of that emotion into the songwriting, and it's just excellently done. Tons of excellent songs. They cap it off with the big epic long Dante's Inferno, which is one of those amazing 12-minute epic long songs, and the legacy of Rime of the Ancient Mariner and tracks like that. And yeah, just absolutely blew me away. We played this to death when it came out back around 95. We would call it every Friday and Saturday night. We just called into the college radio station over and over and just like, play another song off Burnt Offering. So like, we've already played 3 songs for you assholes. I'm like, is anybody else calling in with a request? That's what I thought. Play me some goddamn Iced Earth, motherfucker. So we just over and over. They played that album to death for us. Excellent album. I felt like after this point, it was the next album, The Dark Saga, was where the band finally kind of caught their big break, getting the Todd McFarlane tie-in and all that stuff. And that's where they really got noticed. I just felt after that point, the band was like, oh, hey, people like us now. And they kind of lost that angry edge that, made these early albums so good and so vicious sounding. And so while they did a lot of good albums, later on, none of them resonate with me the way those early ones do. So Burnt Offerings is the kind of pinnacle of Iced Earth's catalog, in my opinion. After this, I can take them or leave them. But early on, they were just magnificent.
I will say for me, this is the one that really clicked with me. I mean, I heard the first one. Mm-hmm. This is the one...
That's the best one after Burnt Offerings, in my opinion.
It's so well written, and it's really a shame that John fell into what he fell into, because he's basically negated an entire career in this climate. But this album is great, well written, unbridled masculinity. I mean, this is it. And for all of his flaws, John Schaefer is probably one of the best rhythm guitarists. I mean, his palm muted crunch is so tight, and he's a good songwriter. I mean, he was. I mean, Iced Earth, after this, I mean, up through, I think, Horror Show, I really, really enjoyed them. Between this album and the Live in Athens 2 CD set, I was pretty much sold on the early Iced Earth stuff. I mean, that shit was just... I mean, that Live in Athens was basically a modern-day Live After Death in a lot of ways. I mean, it had the Derek Riggs cover. Yeah, I think he did that cover. It looks like him anyway.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, but, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't take the early albums away. They're really good. It's good power metal from the U.S. for sure. And I guess I'm next, aren't I? Next up, I really had to... this next band was huge in my death metal development, and I really struggled to pick which one I was going to show out of the first 3 albums, because they're all fucking fantastic. The Stockholm Sound, Grave. I decided to go with Solace, their 3rd album. This album, that you could tell that they were obviously pulling a few cues from Entombed's development. Entombed, as they went on past Left Hand Path and Clandestine, they got a lot more groovy, and there's a bit of groove on this album, but the songs are really well written. The songs are really simplistic, which has always been kind of a trait that Grave did. They wrote good songs, very good simplistic songs, relied really heavily on that tone. I don't know if it's an HM2 tone. I'm sure it probably is. But as of today, I mean, I do listen to their first 3 albums quite a bit, but this is the one I typically throw in the car when I'm going to go get groceries. It's just a great album. Yep. Into the Grave is fucking eternal classic too. I mean, these guys embodied the Stockholm Sound, when it comes to Swedish death metal, and they did it perfectly, and they're still doing it. I mean, I don't know. I have a handful of their newer albums, and they're all at least good. I mean, are they groundbreaking? Maybe a little tired. Yeah, but these first 3 albums, you really can't deny their place, and you really can't deny how good they are. And this album is a really catchy, heavy, awesome album.
Yeah, Grave, good band. That was a band for me. I've never gotten through all of their catalog. At the time, they kind of got a little bit lost in the wash for me, just because there were so many good bands coming out that I wanted to check out. And Grave just, I'd catch some songs here and there, be like, I should get back to those guys. But yeah, they just never quite floated to the top of the list. I was always finding something else to buy and putting the Grave CD back down before I left the store.
Right. Okay, Matt, get you over here.
Well, I'm gonna veto a couple of things just because we've already talked about these bands ad nauseum, but I want to still just mention them really quickly.
Right on.
You know, the first Iced Earth album is my favorite Iced Earth only because it sounds so different than everything else because they had a different singer. This was before Matt Barlow, and they had a much more of like an angrier 80s style of metal on this one. And I, for some reason, this one just always connected with me. But
it's a great album. I like it a lot.
Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say on that one. And then Into the Grave by Grave, it's actually the only physical copy Grave album I have. But like I said, you can throw a dart at any of those first three and you're good. I mean, they're by far one of the strongest Swedish death bands, and seeing them live recently, they've gone back to playing only their really, really early stuff, nothing past the second album. They play a lot of their old demo stuff. Yeah, like I've seen them twice before COVID, and both times I've seen them, they only played demo stuff and stuff off the first album. So, like, holy shit, it was just amazing. So, yeah. So I just wanted to show those really quick, and then we can move on. I kind of want to not show three albums by the same band as much as possible, but we'll see what happens. I got to go with another obvious one for me, obviously Wild Honey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a late convert to that album. It's really good. I have that on vinyl too.
Same here.
With this one. Now, Wild Honey, Tiamat's another one of those bands where any of those early albums I could grab, and they're one of those bands kind of like Sentenced where they sound different as they go along. Every album is a little bit different, and it was really hard for me to pick between Clouds and Wild Honey, but I have to go with Wild Honey just because that one I have so much attached to that from my own personal life, so much of what I was going through in high school and college and everything. Wild Honey helped me through a lot of hard times, and it's one of the most beautiful albums ever recorded. It goes from being really angry and in your face, and then it kind of calms down a little bit, and then it gets a little bit of a peak again, and then it just leaves you feeling good at the end. But I'm remiss to say, there are some questionable lyrics on the album. They do have a song about the Aryan race, which is kind of disturbing a little bit. And nobody ever really gives Tiamat any shit for that. So there's on you, Mr. Johan Edlund, you racist. But yeah, that's there. And even on their follow-up album, A Deeper Kind of Slumber, they've got some really questionable lyrics on there too. They've kind of tried to argue or explain their way out of it, that it was all due to, English not being their first language and maybe not knowing exactly what they were saying. Take that for what it's worth, whatever. But if you can separate art from artists, all that kind of stuff, I still say Wild Honey is, just one of the best albums ever recorded. It's just beautiful. And, yeah, that's really all I can say about Wild Honey.
Yeah, that's one that it was a huge album at the time. I mean, that just got praised so much in the press at the time and stuff.
And it buried so many other Century Media releases at the time. There were so many other albums that came out in '94 and '95, but everyone was still obsessed with Wild Honey. And Wild Honey was such a huge moneymaker. This was a time when Johan Edlund was like a huge cocaine addict, and he would like call up the label and just say, I need money. And they would just give it to him because, the album was just making them so much money. They didn't even care. They're like, oh, you need, money for an 8-ball, whatever. Here you go. And that's like how he got through that whole period. Pretty much everything from Wild Honey all the way through Skeletron. He was, enjoying the nose candy and the LSD quite a bit. And Century Media funded that for them because they made millions of dollars off of Wild Honey. So,
right on, Alan.
Okay. Oh yeah, let's do this one. This one's a little later. Kind of a theme I think we're seeing with a lot of the Century Media stuff so far is, their sort of mid '90s was kind of a golden era for that label, but they've had strong releases outside of that period too. And one of them that I really like is Nocturnal Rights Afterlife.
That's a good album
from 2000. It is a very good album and a very good band in the power metal tradition. This was their fourth album. The first three had a different vocalist. It was Andres Zachrisson, who was the singer back in the glory days of Gotham City, one of those early Swedish heavy metal bands that has a really good cult following to this day. And the first three albums are great. I love all three of those albums. They are really, really fine and overlooked European power metal from the mid and late 90s. But with this album came a change in vocalist. Zachrisson was out. There had always been a big age difference between him and the other members of the band. I don't know if that was a thing that led to them parting ways or not. But the rest of the band were very young kids, and Andrews had been around since the early 80s, with his previous bands. But they brought in Johnny Lundquist on this one, and well, as much as I like the first three albums, this one does give the band a little bit of a shot in the arm. It sounds a little more modern and a little more unique. The other three are very much in the steeped in the classical European power metal vein, and this makes it sound like a 21st century power metal band. I always thought it was very appropriate this came out late in the year 2000, because it really did sort of turn a page for the band. It's got really great guitar work throughout it, really, really strong songwriting. Lundquist's vocals are really strong. After this, the band they did a lot of other good albums, but they kind of also got a little bit in a rut after this. Some of the albums after this started to sound a little bit cookie cutter, whereas if you heard one of them, the next one sounded a lot like the one before it. But Afterlife stood out as a really good benchmark one. And it's also a good testament to what Matt mentioned earlier tonight, that Century Media had bands of all different styles. It's not all just the Sentenced and Samaels and Tiamats. They had European power metal bands on the label, and damn good ones as well. So big shout out to Afterlife, Nocturnal Rights. If you're a power metal fan and you missed this one, go back and check it out for sure.
Good shit.
Yep.
Yep. Was lucky enough to see the band live once too, and they were amazing live. We saw them at Prague Power in Atlanta, and they stole the entire 3-day festival. Nobody came close to that band that whole time.
Awesome.
What year was that, Alan?
Oh boy, it would have been around 2010, plus or minus a year or two.
Yeah, that was before my time when I lived in.
Okay, yeah. 2010 plus or minus a year, but yeah, they weren't one of the main headliners, but they definitely stole the whole show, and they
wiped the floor. They wiped it clean.
They really did, and they were really nice guys. My wife's got pictures with them after the fact. They were really nice, very, very humble. People were just gushing over them, and the guys, you could just tell they were kind of in shock. They're like, wow, you really liked us? This wasn't one of our better shows. We're just like, no, you guys killed it. The fucking promoter, he's really good, really nice guy. It was one of the few times they had issues, and they fucked up their encore. The band was supposed to get to come back out and do 3 shows, and they crossed the wires, and the guys kind of went out to start taking the drum kit apart. And again, the band was just like so humble. They're just like, oh, okay, I guess we're done now. Everyone kind of felt like, I think they were going to play a little bit more. But by the time anybody in charge caught it, they'd already, disassembled half the shit, and the band was just like, oh no, it's cool, it's all right. We just thought maybe we were playing too long and you needed to catch up or something. It's okay. Like, damn it. But enough of that.
For me, next up, pound for pound, riff for riff, this is one of the heaviest, most crushing death metal albums ever by any band. Asfix, The Rack.
Yes.
This thing is utterly devastating from the beginning to the end, and arguably their best album. Features
I picked this one.
I like that album too, but it's just not as. This is just stripped down, nasty death doom, as sick as it can get. And Martin Van Druenen's vocals are just abysmal on this album, in a good way, abysmal, not bad, but
it may be his best vocal performance.
It might be. I mean, I really love
that out there.
I mean, this could go toe to toe with "Consuming Impulse" by Pestilence, which also has probably one of his best vocal performances, but. This band, man, after this devastating album, they put out some good shit. Like the Crush of Cenotaph EP is really good. Last Man on Earth is really good. But after that, they started to struggle a little bit. Van Druenen left. You know, they had different singers come in. They had the guy from Soulburn come in and sing with them for a while. Van Druenen eventually came back on Death the Brutal Way, I think is the name of that album, which is really good as well. And he's still with the band to this day. In fact, I think he's the only original member left in the band. But this album, if you guys have not heard The Rack by Asfix, this is one that it's produced so heavy and the riffs are so stripped down and feral. They rattle the speaker cones. I mean, they're just those crunches on the low A or whatever the fuck they're tuned to is just, this is great. Absolutely great. Perfect death metal album. And there's a reason why so many modern death metal bands are aping the Van Druenen drawl, you know, the way he sings. There's so many bands that sound like him anymore. It's because he did it right, and he did it in a way that is often hard to imitate.
Yeah. And as heavy and as dirty as that album sounds, it's also still everything's very clean and well separated. I mean, you can hear everything on that album very clearly. It's not stuff isn't buried on that album at all. Because I replayed that, it's the one I picked for tonight too. And just like, man, this is just, it's a really well constructed album sonically. You can just everything's very distinguishable for that style.
Sorry, I'm going through some of the comments here.
Oh no, it's all good. Yeah, there's a ton of great comments coming through.
I picked last one on Earth just because I don't have the Rack, unfortunately.
You need it. It's so good.
I know I do. I just haven't gotten around to it. But this one I've always enjoyed. I think it stands right up there with the Rack. This one just doesn't sound as nasty. It's got much more of a, not really a groove, but it's got a little bit more feeling to it, and it's not
streamlined.
Not such a caustic attack. It doesn't have like blowouts all over it like the Rack kind of does. So that's why I like this one. But if I had the Rack, I just as easily could have picked that one too. So,
right on. Yeah. You're up, man.
All right. I am going to go with an album where, 1994, it was a big year for Century Media. Like we said, Wild Honey just kind of dominated. And this is an album that I think really got overlooked and pushed to the side. Some people know about this just because one of the members is, pretty prominent in YouTube, but I'm going to go with Dance the Marble Naked by Enchantment.
Yeah, new album coming out this year.
They do. My buddy at Transcending Records is going to be releasing it. So
right on.
Be on the lookout for that. But this totally got ignored. I'd never really heard about this album until, fairly recently, like within the past few years. And from what I can tell, like when I go back and I look at it, that the mid-early 90s is kind of the Death Doom heyday when you think about it,
Yeah.
Anathema was huge. My Dying Bride was huge. Paradise Lost was huge. And all of those bands had an album that they had just released in 1993. So 1994, you would think would kind of carry that on, this really big wave of Death Doom. And I think that's probably why Enchantment were signed by Century Media, because they're a very solid Death Doom band, and they figured, here's one that Peaceville didn't scoop up, let's throw them out there. But that was the year that Wild Honey came out, and Wild Honey just dominated.
Yeah.
So a lot of people I think overlooked Enchantment's Dance the Marble Naked at the time. It's definitely gotten a lot more notice and exposure as time has gone on. I know a lot of people tend to rag on the vocals on this album a lot.
They're an acquired taste.
Yeah, definitely an acquired taste. But this is actually the Transcending Records pressing of this. It has the demos, and the demos on this sound far better than the actual album do, in my opinion.
Huh.
Because the vocals, I mean, it doesn't sound great. It's definitely a demo. It's kind of, degraded, but the vocals are harsh, and they're like, they're there. They're where they needed to be. And something got lost in the translation. I don't know what it was, but something got lost between those demos and when this album came out. But that's not to say that this isn't a good album. I think if you were a fan of Anathema more so than maybe Paradise Lost or My Dying Bride, I think early Anathema fans would really enjoy this album by Enchantment. So gotta throw that out for Mr. Mark G with a C, because this is his band and they're good.
Yep, and he's a super nice guy too. You guys, if you're not familiar with Mark G with a C, go check out his channel. Good stuff.
Yep. So what do you guys think of Enchantment? Have you heard this? Are you familiar with it? What are your takes on it?
I've not heard the whole album. I've heard parts of it over the years because it was one that I always saw on Century Media lists, but they didn't really get featured prominently as on the compilations, or they got kind of overshadowed by other things at the time, like you said. But yeah, I remember liking it, but I just never circled back to the band to check out the whole album.
I highly recommend you circle back and check out the A Tear for Young Eloquence demo. It's on the Transcending Records press. I'm sure it's on YouTube as well, but A Tear for Young Eloquence. It is a very solid demo. I think you'd probably, if you didn't like this album, the vocals, anything about it, you would like the demos. So
I've got an OG press of the CD that I picked up a year or so ago. I'm really late convert to it. When it came out, I had a friend that had it. And I was very much into the old My Dying Bride, old Paradise Lost, really brutal vocal style. And the vocals back then didn't really click with me that well. But now going back all these years, and I really like the album. It's a good album. I like the vocals even. It's unique. I can see why they got signed during the time. I mean, they're English. They're Doom. And that time, I think labels were just looking for bands that fit the My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost formula. And
93 and 94 were the years for that. So
yep. And
you saw a huge amount of those bands coming out, not just on Century Media. So
it's good shit, and I'm really looking forward to hear what they come up with after all those years behind them. It's going to be really interesting to see how it goes for them.
Yeah,
Alan.
All right. I'm going to go with another one from the early 2000s. So, and this album had a lot that could have gone wrong, but somehow it worked out really, really well. It's a rare exception of a band coming back out of the shadows and nailing it with the comeback. Monotheist.
Oh my God, such a good record.
Celtic Frost. This is a very good, crushingly heavy, dark album. Really, this was a band that, for a long time, Warrior didn't want to get it back together, and I respected that. What was really going to be accomplished by trying to bring that back and, make some money. Oh, okay, well, I guess you make some money. But, could you really, in terms of add anything to the Celtic Frost legacy that wasn't going to be a rehash or a disappointment? And with this one, he proved without a doubt that he could. It was a very controversial album when it came out. Some folks did not like it very much. I passed on it hard when it came out at first. I'm notorious for not wanting to really check bands out when they get back together after, these, 10, 20-year hiatuses. Too many of those projects disappoint me. Too many times, they can't recapture what they were doing when they were younger. But let's see, this came out. Yeah, that's the summer this came out. I got sent to Caltech to work in one of their labs for about 3 weeks on a interdisciplinary lab project thing. Lucky me. And I ended up I spent a lot of time, in the labs over there, working on shit. But I basically was living out of a suitcase. Well, there was a Tower Records right down the street. So, I'd set the equipment up, let it run. and go down there and browse for a while because there was nothing to do in between. And they had this, and I was just like, what the hell? I've got the time. I've got nothing else to do. I'll buy it. I'll put it on in the background. I'll give it a chance. And I was really amazed at how good this turned out to be. Saw them twice when they were touring with this stuff. Sounded incredibly good live both times. So, yeah, it was a little bit of a shame they didn't follow it up with more material, but I guess that's what Triptychon is for, because that's where we ended up. Yeah, so I understand why some folks maybe don't like it, but I think it's a cool album. It's not derivative of their earlier material at all. It still very much feels like a Celtic Frost album, though. I think it definitely also kind of helped right a lot of the wrongs that happened later in the original Celtic Frost's discography. That this kind of you got the taste out of your mouth from those last couple of albums that had a lot of issues with them. So I think this one definitely is a highlight for Century Media.
That album to me is the art piece that Into the Pandemonium should have been. And I don't know if it took all the time and years and development to get there, because Celtic Frost really struggled hard after Into the Pandemonium. And man, I was so disappointed with Into the Pandemonium. I mean, now I can go back and like a few songs, but the whole album I do not like. I don't like it from start to finish. I think it's getting there to where they wanted to be. That Monotheist, that album blew me away, because it maintained the Celtic Frost aesthetic and finally tapped into an avant-garde vein that they've always strove to be, Mm-hmm. And it is just so well done and creative and dark and depressing and unique. I mean, it wasn't just Tom singing on that one. Martin Ayan also, God coming into human flesh.
He sounds good when he does the vocals.
Fucking great. I mean, what unique genre expanding music they made for that record.
Yep. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it definitely has those artistic qualities about it, but without being so flamboyant and in your face about it.
It's not pretentious. It's not pretentious.
Yeah, it's a very quiet and subtle album at times, but yeah, there's a lot going on there that it fits them perfectly, in my opinion.
So how do you compare Monotheist to the Triptychon stuff? Because I feel like Monotheist is far superior to the Triptychon.
I agree.
And the Triptychon stuff seems very pretentious to me. So that's just me.
I don't take it as pretentious. I just think that he was trying to continue on with the Monotheist aesthetic, but it just doesn't have that artistic flair to it. I think it's a little more normal sounding, if you will, like a more streamlined take of what they did with Monotheist.
In a way,
be a level of pretension with Celtic Frost. That's why I'm so surprised that Monotheist didn't have that full. Because I listen to it, I don't get we're so highbrow. I just hear an album that had been decades in the making finally come to fruition the way that I think the artist wanted it and the way I wanted to hear it. I mean, I was quite, and it wasn't so artistic that it was hard to listen to, which was for me, because the super artistic albums, they tend to be a little too highfalutin and difficult to listen to. You can appreciate the talent behind it, but I mean, that album I kept going back to because the songs at the core were still really good, Anyway,
that would be you. It's all you, Marty.
Well, I'm going to take it back a little more knuckle dragging, and I'm still harping on that compilation that changed my whole perspective on, introduced me to really good death metal, and that would be this, Where No Life Dwells, by Johnny Headland, who was the bass player for the much praised Nihilist, who splintered and became Entombed and Unleashed, essentially.
Does your copy have the rare bonus tracks, or is yours OG press?
I don't know.
Mine's 20 songs, so this is not the 20 songs edition. I had the OG cassette of it, and then I upgraded to this and got rid of the cassette. But yeah, I mean, these guys are great. Their first 3 albums are really good. After that, they're hit or miss for me. They tended to get a little bit more groovy and super stripped down, which
made it a little more difficult for me to really appreciate. But this stuff is super stripped down, but just really good Swedish death metal that does not sound like everybody else in the Sweden. These guys had their own thing going on. He kind of went a different path than the everybody aping the HM2 sound, like Entombed in Grave, all those bands. Dismember. This sounds nothing like that. They have their own characteristics, which I think is really cool of them. And yeah, stands up, holds up to this day, is good shit.
Yeah, indeed. I'm surprised it took us an hour for anyone to pull an Unleashed album.
It was going to be my next one that I pulled out here, but Marty beat me to it, of course.
Well, you know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, fantastic record, and it's my favorite out of all of theirs. It's really the only one I go back to is this one. So
yeah, I had a hard time figuring out which Unleashed album to pick. I don't have a copy of it anymore, so I wasn't going to show it. But the one I probably played the most was actually Victory, the fourth one, where they started to strip the sound down a little bit. I hadn't played it in a long time, so I was like, don't know if it quite makes the cut. So I went back and played it, on YouTube this week. And that album holds up extremely well after all these years.
Yeah.
Still really like that one. But yeah,
so why is it, do you think, like, Unleashed never hit the peaks that, like, Amon Amarth did? Because to me, Unleashed is like a million times better than Amon Amarth. But Amon Amarth everybody knows, but nobody really knows Unleashed.
I mean, some people would disagree with me, but I think Unleashed kind of lost the muse. I mean, Johnny kind of abandoned the death metal style vocals and started to do like a hardcore shout. I don't want to say it's hardcore shout, but he started shouting more, which to me lost a bit of the edge, and the songs really started to get super simplistic and kind of boring. But they like come around with Hammer Battalion and stuff like that. It started to get better again. So I mean, again, people will disagree with me on it. That's just personal preference, but. Yeah. Their first three to me, even on Across the Open Sea, I really like that album, but the songs started to get a little predictable,
Yeah. I lost track of them.
I find it interesting that like they always sing about the Viking stuff, and everyone harps on Amon Amarth for being the Viking metal band. It's like, have you ever heard Unleashed? They were around way before Amon Amarth. So
there's a reason why Amon Amarth are so big. I mean, if you listen to like Twilight of the Thunder God, it's a great album, but it is essentially a pop death metal album. Yeah. It is structured very much like a pop record, but like the structures are very pop to me. They're very simple.
Like Sabaton. They kind of follow the Sabaton model.
And I like Sabaton as well. It's just because they fall into an easy to digest formula, but Amon Amarth present it in a death metal, dressing essentially.
Yeah.
And then after Twilight of the Thunder God, they started to fall off for me too. Their shit started getting real derivative at that point. But Twilight of the Thunder God is a fun fucking listen. I mean, It just is.
Yeah,
definitely.
Is that the one that has Guardians of Asgard on it?
Yeah.
The one where
Petrov sings on it.
Petrov sings on it. Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I remember after Victory, some of those Unleashed albums. I never heard them. I kind of just lost track of the band, but I remember anytime they got reviewed, they were not getting good reviews on those next 2 or 3 albums. Kind of what Marty had said, that people were saying they sounded very tired, very samey. That didn't sound like Johnny was putting a whole lot of effort into them necessarily. So that may be, and that would be about the same time Amon Amarth started getting on people's radar. Was about the time Unleashed was kind of hitting a bit of a rut, maybe. So maybe it was just bad timing in that sense.
I never thought about that. That is that's about right. Yeah.
Yeah, because once Sent from the Golden Hall, Metal Blade put that one out around 98.
That's a good album.
Put them on the map. Yeah, not a bad one.
With Odin on Our Side is where they started to really streamline their sound and get a little more poppy, in my opinion, anyway. Alan, can you put a thing over your mic? We're picking up your ceiling fan now. The wind is catching the mic.
Let me try something. We'll see.
You got a thing against the sound of a fan?
No, just it's like a constant.
Told me to turn mine off. I'm sweating balls here now.
Well, you live in hell.
Let's see if that helps, Marty. We'll see.
Maybe it's something else. I don't know. I just assumed it was the fans. Anyway, Hey, we are up with Matt.
All right. That's not Matt. Oh, there he is. Hey, there he is. So we're going to go to probably the most pretentious band that has ever been signed to Century Media. And I'm hard-pressed to find anyone that wouldn't agree about Irreligious by Moonspell. Come on.
Yep.
Come on, give it to me. What's more pretentious than when you're looking at what you got there? Oh, okay, there you go. But that one's better. This one is just, oh my God, so in your face and ridiculous that it's kind of one of those terrible albums that I just loved because it's so cheesy, but I can't help but sing along to every song on it, especially Opium, the hit single off of Irreligious. It's great, man. Great stuff. Ruin and Misery, that was a really great song on this album too. But yeah, I've always had a soft spot for Irreligious, and I think a lot of that is because that song was on that VHS that I showed earlier tonight. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of those songs they were really pushing, but you don't really hear a lot of metal bands out of Portugal. I mean, I don't know. Is Lacuna Coil from Portugal? They sound like they are. They might be. I don't know. I can't remember.
They might be Spanish. I'm not.
Someone in the comments will tell me, I'm sure. But hearing metal bands from Portugal wasn't a thing that you were really exposed to back in the day. And Moonspell just really took that train and rode it all the way through town, especially with their bonkers off the wall silliness of goth nonsense. So I don't know. I love this album, but I kind of hate it at the same time. But I kind of love it too.
That's where I'm kind of at with Wolfheart. To me, they're Under the Sign of the Moonspell, I think was the name of it, or Under the Moonspell.
Under the Moonspell.
Yeah, and then this one, Wolfheart. For some reason, I really kind of attached to this when it was sent in for review, and mainly because of the second to the last track, Alma Mater. It's just a really good song. I guess Roberto,
Alma Mater rules. That song is a great fucking
song.
And that's actually not a Century Media release. That is a licensed Moonspell album.
Oh, great. Well, I'm breaking the rules.
Way to go, Marty.
But I think this band, what really bothered me was the vampiric Count Chocula romanticism of Roberto's vocals.
What are you talking about, Marty? The Moonspell is upon you.
Opium.
Yeah, I mean, the one that Matt showed is where I kind of jumped off the train. This one here I listened to a bit because it's a pretty well written album, and it's pretty unique. When it's like the Spanish or Portugal derivative of Cradle of Filth, but maybe not as pretentious. But I don't know, the Count Chocula vocals. I mean, I listen to this album, I still enjoy it, but man, the vocals kind of rub that vampiric romanticism shit. It just fucking hated that crap.
I mean, if Moonspell ever toured with Cradle of Filth, I mean, what would happen?
Perfect.
I'm sure it did happen at some point, but man, can you imagine the people that went to that show? Oh my God!
You could smell the clove cigarettes from a block down the fucking...
smell the patchouli and cloves from 7 towns over, man.
Yeah, Wolfheart's a cheesy one. I always kind of liked Wolfheart as well. I have not played the album in ages, but when it came out, it was kind of fun. It was when I saw advertised some and had read about it. I was like, yeah, that seems like it might be fun. Didn't get around to picking it up, and I was at literally like a little outdoor flea market. Emphasis on the fleas in this particular one. Just little town up in the mountains here in the South. Digging through somebody's box of CDs, and it's all Garth Brooks and a Bing Crosby Christmas, and they had a copy of Wolfheart. And this wasn't long after it had come out. This was within a year of its release. I'm just looking. I'm just like, I'm having one of these surreal moments. Am I in the Matrix? This cannot be happening. This is.
So did you buy it? Did you buy it?
Oh, absolutely! I bought it and played it and enjoyed it. It was just to this day as one of the weirdest albums I have found in one of the weirdest places. It makes no sense. It would be like going out to the middle of the Sahara Desert and finding a Toys R Us that's still open. This doesn't belong here at all.
You know what? Human Falafel, you're right. I'm thinking of Under the Moonspell, the EP that came out before Wolfheart. That one I think was reissued by Century Media. So Marty, you didn't break any rules, man. I will suck it. I will suck that Wolfheart.
That's right. Alan, you are up. I'm going to go use the little boys' room while you're going on about stuff here.
I'm going to go grab a beer while you're doing that. So
Okay, well...
well, first I want to see what you're going to show so I can get pissed or not.
Well,
same.
I'm going to show this.
We're safe.
It's after 10
I'm
o'clock.
out of here. Bye.
You can get a little blue. Next one for me is November's Classica. Not the most well-known band on Century Media's roster, but they're another band that's put out a lot of quality releases and stayed with the label for a while. The thing with November to me, I always liked this band in part because they were, to me, what Opeth was supposed to sound like. You know, people, of course, loved early Opeth. I tried really hard to get into early Opeth, and some of it's okay. It's never been my favorite stuff ever recorded. I just always found a lot of their transitions a little too back and forth. That, you know, the songs were, you know, here's going to be the aggressive verse, and now we'll have the quiet, laid-back 70s chorus, and now we'll do the aggressive verse. It just never quite gelled for me. But November out of Italy, they had those same kind of aspirations of wanting to blend these different styles, you know, use harsh vocals, use clean vocals, have, you know, very different influences. But this band made it work a lot better for me. The lyrics are kind of weird. You can tell English is probably like their third language. Definitely not their first or second, I want to bet. But they do a very good job. You know, the aggressive parts and faster material, you know, sounds very good, very clean. The slower parts are very emotive, and I think that's one of the areas they excelled over Opeth. Was the sad parts sound very sad, and the kind of, you know, wistful parts sound very wistful. They really do a good job of capturing the emotion, even though they don't know exactly the words that they need to use for the lyrics sometimes. They always, you know, really know how to convey the right sense of emotion. So November albums are almost always, you know, get a big thumbs up for me over the years. So
never heard of them. That's one that always passed by me. I haven't. No one mentioned November whatsoever.
Not surprised. They've never developed a big following anywhere, but they're still around. Their last album was just a few years ago, and it was very good as well. They have their style. They're, you know, very good songwriters. They know how to put that kind of material together. So yeah, my hot take for the night is this is what Opeth was supposed to sound like in the early days, but November does it better.
Shots fired.
I would honestly say if I was flipping through a CD rack and saw that cover, you know, that mid 90s Photoshop, early Photoshop, you know, graphic art looking cover. Although the butt cheeks would have been a curious interest for a minute, but yeah, I would have just totally skipped over that. You can kind of look at that and kind of think what it sounds like, you know.
Yeah,
November's Doom suffers from that a lot too. Like all those November bands, like, okay, I know exactly what you sound like because you have November in your name.
Yeah.
The cover art is always, you know, again, they get that little more. They're trying to look a little arty, but they leave you with no idea what the musical identity is going to be like. But yeah, they've done a lot of quality stuff over the years. And Classica was their third album. I think it's the one where their sound really started to come together. I like the first album a lot, but it, you know, has rough patches. It's very much a band, you know, getting used to things. But by the time Classica came out, they were really starting to gel and get really good at emphasizing those different emotions through the music. So that's my pet band for the night.
Okay, I'm going to jump the track a little bit here. I'm going to circle back around to the death metal world, but I wanted to talk about this before anybody else did. But you want to talk about a band that really put themselves on the map with a great fucking album. I mean, their early shit's great too, but Rotting Christ, Triarchy of the Lost Lovers.
Oh, yeah.
This is a great album. I mean,
I pulled this one.
That one's really good too, but this one has got the riffs, man. This is still them clinging to their earlier years, but putting maybe a bit more of a commercial spin on it, not in a bad way. But the songwriting on this is great. The riffs are so melodic and so good. When I first heard this, I was very much not into the Greek scene. There was something about the Greek scene that just didn't click with me, and this album made it click. It made me go back and appreciate Varathron, the earlier Greek bands.
That Greek sound is weird.
It is really weird, but it's super melodic, and that staccato type riffs, just the way that they're played. This was an eye opener for me. This album is just so really well written. Yet, even though they have a bigger push from a bigger label, they may have taken some of the extremity away from their earlier sound. They really found a pocket that they could grow in. Other than calling themselves Rotting Christ, that's not really that marketable of an album to be, super commercial success. But this music is really well written. The songs are and the structures are interesting. Everything about this album is really good. And if you have not heard Rotting Christ, this is a good one to start.
That album actually reminds me a lot kind of Ceremony of Opposites in a way, just because it's like a slower, doomier style of black metal with orchestration behind it. And it just gives it like a really weird, like kind of a vibe,
Yep.
I could be wrong on that, but I've always looked at Triarchy and Ceremony as almost brother-sister albums in a way.
Yeah, and that Dead Poem album is really good. It's just not as... It seems
but
like
it comes with a free compilation, Marty.
It does.
It has a free compilation. The compilation is called Darkness We Feel. we feel the darkness.
We feel the darkness.
The new shampoo.
Opium.
The new shampoo from Johnson & Johnson. Darkness We Feel.
Yeah. Dead Poem is all right, but Triarchy really hits it out of the park with that style.
Okay, we are back to Matt.
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of a sad bastard in 1997 when this came out, because this is the one that really spoke to me a little bit more than Triarchy. I really, really liked Triarchy, but at the time, I don't know what it was. Just this one really connected with me a lot more. I think I don't know. Like I said, I guess I was a sad bastard. Just something about the romanticism of this album. It kind of put a wedge in the sand, or a line in the sand, between what Rotting Christ was and what they were playing around with for a long time before they got really weird and kind of awesome.
Well, you've come a long way since being oh, wait a minute, you're still a sad bastard.
I'm still a sad bastard. But, I mean, Rotting Christ has always been one of my favorite bands. I just have always really liked a Dead Poem, and it doesn't hurt that it came with Darkness We Feel. We feel it.
Have feelings too.
The darkness. I feel it. But anyway, so that's Rotting Christ. But the one I wanted to get into is surprised it's taken so long, but
you bastard.
I knew somebody had to have it, but man, this album is insane. It is great. This is like a coke-fueled nightmare of Devin Townsend just playing his balls off, and he even says it in the song Detox. There's like a line in that song that goes, "This is just high school bullshit," and then they just play the same riff over and over again, and it just makes you go like this. I mean, this entire album, if you can't headbang to this the entire time and just feel like you're pumped full of speed or other narcotics that speed you up, I mean, this is the album that does it. So I don't know, man. What do you guys think of City? I think it's the best Strapping Young Lad album.
It's the best Devin Townsend has ever done, and this to me,
I won't go that far, sir. But I think it's the best Strapping Young Lad album.
Have y'all heard of the term "fuck you"? Well, this is the sonic equivalent to the term "fuck you." I mean, it's got Gene Hoglan on drums. He is a fucking machine. He drives the intensity level over the edge. But, it isn't just, obviously showcases Devin's wide range from, insane cat-like shrieking to new wave style singing. I mean, this album goes from blasting insanity to, Room 429. It's like a new wave song. And it's fucking great. Yeah. I mean, every song on this album is a home run. It's a home run, and it's completely intense, well produced. And it's great. This is another one of those albums that I can listen to 10 times in a row and be psyched. Where did you get, is that the new Record Store Day release?
No, this is actually the Blood Music pressing that came out a little while ago.
Yeah. See, I just have the promo they sent me back in the day when I was doing the zine. And I went to buy an actual CD of it on eBay, and the guy didn't disclose that it was a promo, so he sent me the exact same thing I had.
Oh,
which I told him, I said, dude, I'm not paying $20 for this, dude. He took it back and refunded me, but
yeah.
Now, here we go.
Like Marty, you said, Psy was one of the bands you just never could quite get. Devin Townsend is an artist I just can't get.
I love him. I really like a lot of his output.
Fanboy.
Yes, I've heard a couple of the different strapping young lad albums. People, have sent me things here and there back in the tape train days. Like, you got to check this out. And I'd play it a couple times, and I'd just be like, I don't know what the hell I'm listening to right now. Here's my head, and here's this album, and we're just going to have to move on to the next one. So I'm not saying it's bad at all. I'm just saying I've never figured it out.
I mean, I'm going for a Devin Townsend circa 2004 look. I mean, it's going to get there eventually.
You just got to stop washing your hair.
It's going to grow out to here. I'm going to stop washing it, and I'm going to dread it out. I'm going to look fucking sexy as shit. And it's all going to be because of Devin Townsend, because Devin Townsend is the man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I have by Devin Townsend, I think he was like a producer on the Shocker soundtrack, and that may be the only Devin Townsend.
Well, he was a singer for Steve Vai for a couple of albums.
That's where he started.
Yep. And he's done stuff with Frontline Assembly, and I mean, he's had a few solo projects, and it's all good. Everything he touches is good. So,
hey, Alan, whatever you did to your sound, undo it, because we're still getting the fan sound, and you kind of sound like you're in a can.
Okay. I'm not sure the fan sound's coming on my end. Yeah, I moved the mic a little bit, but yeah, it was further away from me.
You sound fine on my end.
You sound fine. I just don't want anybody to hear it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the little whoosh sound is that we're hearing sometimes.
It's all good. Alan's next.
Okay. Well, let's go with old favorite, both band and album, Jagdpanzer's Age of Mastery. So this band, of course, was kind of legendary for making one of the great albums from the 1980s, but then disappearing. The band fell apart really quick after their one album. Just in reading interviews and stuff, it was just a matter of, didn't have enough label support. They were broke. They didn't have, the support or resources to keep going back in the day after Ample Destruction. So, members left and stuff. They put out a second album much, much later called Dissident Alliance, and it is one of the most maligned pieces of crap ever recorded. I checked earlier. It literally has a Metal Archive score of like 19%, and that might be generous. It was rough. But then, some years went by, and, Harry Conklin, guys got, back together, reformed, and gave it another go. Confusingly, their comeback album was their third release and called The Fourth Judgment. But then this was their fourth release and called The Age of Mastery. And this was the one I felt like, the band was really back and in top form. Just every song on here is a really good, solid slab of heavy metal. And again, came out around 98, right when people were starting to pay more attention to traditional heavy metal again, in the wake of Hammerfall's success. So the timing was right. The band put out a string of albums after this. They were getting an album cranked out like every 18 months or so for a while. But yeah, this is one I go back and play a lot. Again, I like the track list a lot. Every song's got its own personality. It's a veteran band in fine form, and it's another good example of a band, successfully pulling off the comeback, even though this is technically the second comeback album for them. So really good one in their catalog. After this, again, it's almost like they started making the albums a little too fast. They didn't have enough time to make them go from good to great. But this one is really great. I've always really liked this one by them. So, yeah, another odd one in Century Media's catalog. They helped bring back some of these veteran bands and gave them new life.
Yeah, I didn't even realize they were on Century Media at one point.
It didn't occur to me when the topic came up as I was going through the discography, though. I was just like, oh, yeah, that was.
Even Exodus was on Century Media for like a live album or something.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Another lesson in violence. Yeah, live. Yep. I am next, and I'm going to kick it back to death metal. Though this is not my favorite Merciless album. My favorite would be their debut, Abject Offerings, which came out on Restless. And if you have never heard Merciless, they're a French death metal band, and check out Abject Offerings, the song Substance of Purity. Perfect death metal song. But their second album, Colored Funeral, shows a bit of progression. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of great riffs on this album. It's really well written. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of earlier Gorguts. But when this came out, I spun the ever-loving shit out of this thing. And they're a great death metal band that no one really talks about. After this album, they put out a really shitty record and then kind of broke up. But I guess they're back together putting out stuff. I have not heard any of it. I cannot tell if any of it is good or not. They're kind of like Desultory from Sweden, where they, put out a couple great records and disbanded, then got back together after a really shitty album and rekindled their career and started putting out good records again. But Colored Funeral, kind of a provocative cover there. I'm sure it has something more important to say, but great record. Check it out. Good band. And let's go with Matt.
All right. Well, I'm going to pick one that a lot of people kind of forget about, I think, because this is a band that has gone on to like massive success, and they've kind of become a gimmick in a way. But people tend to forget that they weren't always a gimmick, and they used to actually be really good. This is my favorite Arch Enemy album, Burning Bridges. This is what their original singer, Johan Leva, I'm probably butchering the hell out of his name, but I don't know why he left the band, but I never liked these guys after this album. I never liked any of that Angela stuff, and then whoever the new girl is, Alyssa, I think her name is. But, I mean, this is a band that just really just repeated themselves over and over and over again. And really, if you just go back and listen to their first few albums with Johan, I mean, this album is a beast. I mean, this whole album is great, start to finish. A lot of people forget that this era exists. This is actually a promo that I got from back in my fanzine days. These little cardboard promos, which are fun. Hey, the new album came out in 1999. Look at that. In Junely 13.
Not a lot of proofreading going on at Century Media in those days, but
But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when Carcass was done, a lot of people gravitated right over to Arch Enemy, but they didn't really get huge until Angela joined the band, and that's kind of when I checked out. It just wasn't my thing at the time, and I always liked this though. I mean, this was a free promo that I got, and it lived in my car for a really long time, and I still enjoy it to this day. So, What are your thoughts on Arch Enemy? They are a huge staple of Century Media, and still to this day, like one of their most popular bands. But I could give a fuck about 99% of their output. This is good.
I could give a fuck about that early stuff too. For some reason, it did not connect with me. I don't know.
Really?
It came out during a time when there were so many bands in Sweden kind of doing a similar sound. Going between the early In Flames and Carcass sound, Carcass Heartwork sound, which that's what that Arch Enemy strikes me as, is a lesser version of Heartwork. I don't know. There's something about them. I don't know if it was too clean of a production. I don't know what it was, but those albums, I couldn't.
When was the last time you gave them a shot? Those early Arch Enemies.
Probably that album.
that album. So it's been a couple decades, right?
It's been a while, yeah. And I saw them live with that Angela once, and it was, I mean, they were good. I just didn't care, you know?
Yeah, kind of the same. But yeah, I remember that album definitely made a bit of a splash when it came out.
It did.
When you showed them out. That one helped get the band on the map.
Totally.
But then once they changed vocalists, they got so much bigger that it was almost like, they had kind of restarted their career in a way. So that, you don't hear the early ones mentioned. I was always kind of a take them or leave them kind of band. They weren't bad, but I'd hear the album and be like, yeah, it's all right, but it was not something. I never liked them enough to pick up their albums. It was the kind of thing I'd hear somebody else would play it. I'd hear it be like, yeah, it's not bad, but I would never. I never felt like, oh man, I gotta go home and buy that.
Yeah, I probably never would have bought this if I didn't get it sent to me for free in the mail. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and in 1999, I thought it was good.
Yeah,
and I just thought they became far too much of a gimmick. Like it's sad to say, but it's like they're the death metal band with a female vocalist. Ooh, like how cool is that? She's so hot, man. And it just became. I was like, God, I just don't care about anymore.
But yeah, I mean, just with there were the other bands trying to do in that same general area with like Dark Tranquility, In Flames, Carcass. I liked those bands better, and so there was never really a reason for me to pick up tons of Arch Enemy or follow up on them. It's just like, I'd rather listen to The Mind's Eye or Jester Race.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to shout out the early era of Arch Enemy, where I thought, if you were a fan of that Heartwork era of Carcass, you might want to revisit it, check it out.
June Lee, 1999. I remember it well.
June Lee was a fantastic month.
It was a good month.
And that was an especially sad bastard that month.
I was listening to so much darkness we feel. I felt the darkness. It was in me, and
that's better than the darkness feeling you.
that extra moisturizing you're feeling is darkness we feel. Okay, here we go. Alan.
Okay, next one I wanted to mention, I don't own a copy of to show right now, and that's bet on me because it's a very good album by a very good band that they did 3 albums originally. At least the first 2 were stellar. Sacramentum, The Coming of Chaos. Always liked Sacramentum a lot. I felt like they always lived in the shadow of Dissection. Was the only reason that they didn't get more attention.
Well, Far Away from the Sun was an exact Dissection clone.
Yes,
it's a killer album.
But it's a killer. I mean, it's a killer album in its own right. And Coming of Chaos is a really good follow up to that. It's cleaned up a little bit, a little tighter, of course. It's another one I haven't played in a long time, but revisiting it is just like, man, this is a really good album. Why don't I still own this? Oh yeah, I had to get rid of 200 CDs a few years ago, and I guess that was in the box. Bad on me. But those first 2 Sacramentum albums just really good, Swedish metal in that, whether you want to call it Blackened Death or Deathly Black or whatever, they very much, earned their place in the conversation in terms of who's next in line behind Dissection for that style. The third album,
if the world doesn't fall apart, you can see them at MDF next year. They're supposed to be playing.
Yep, they're making noise and making some waves again these days. Yeah. The third album I never cared for as much. I felt like something was missing off of that album. I got rid of that one a long time ago and never did want that one back. But yeah, Coming of Chaos is one of those I should not have let go of. I'll pick it back up someday.
Right on. Okay.
Back to you, Marty.
I'm sticking with the death. This album isn't necessarily an amazing album. And it's far from Century Media's best album, but I found this album to be very influential for me, and it's Comic-Con's Megatrends in Brutality. This is a project band that every album had a different vocalist. This is their first album, and as you can tell by the logo, the vocalist on this album is LG Petrov from Entombed. And this album is just kind of straight up Swedish death metal, but what sets them a bit apart from the rest of the pack is they used a drum machine for their shit. And for me, living in northern Michigan, having a pseudo death metal band back in the day, and we couldn't find a drummer, I took a band like this as a, it's okay to work with a drum machine. And is this a great album? It really isn't, but it's decent. And Petrov sounds good. There's some good songs on it. The follow-up to this one is Converging Conspiracies, which is the same formula with the drum machine in it, but it's got Martin Van Drunen singing on it, which is also a good album. But yeah, Comic-Con, Megatrends in Brutality. I'm not going to go on and on about that because it's not amazing. Everybody heard that?
That one I don't know.
Nope. Right on.
I mean, I've seen it around, but I haven't actually heard it.
Right on. And you are up, Matt.
Oh, shit. Okay. Well, let's go to a band that, can't believe no one's talked about Nevermore yet.
I don't have a lot of Nevermore. Some stuff, but not a lot.
Nevermore is one of those bands where a lot of people tend to forget about them, I think.
They're great.
But they're great. I mean, World Dane sounds amazing. I mean, everyone these days gravitates towards that early Sanctuary stuff. But, I mean, the early Nevermore stuff was just as good, I think.
Yeah.
And the one thing that always impressed me about World Dane is, he always sounded like the most angry of all of the, power metal singers, whatever you want to call them. He just had such an anger to his voice, but could still hit those highs while he's like being angry. It's like, man, if only he growled, he would really be a good growler. But no, he's doing the and like he's out there with it. But man, I just always really liked his approach to how he sang. And Nevermore, I just always thought was great. I really liked this first album a lot. It was a flip of a coin between this one or The Politics of Ecstasy, the second album. I think that one is equally as good, but I just really, really enjoyed the early one right here. And if only he could have quit drinking for a little while, he would still be here. But,
yeah, he's a definite strong talent. And I mean, a lot of those, I don't know which album it's got the girl on the cover and the song Sworn on it. It's such a great fucking record.
Something like Dreaming Neon Black, I think. Is it the one where there's a woman swimming in the pool, kind of?
Dead Heart in a Dead World.
Dead Heart in the Dead World. Okay, there you go.
That's a great fucking record. It's really, really good.
I mean, they're all good except for, I'd say, like the last couple where they, kind of lost the muse, I think. But, the first 4 or 5 albums are solid. Absolutely solid. And yeah, I just really appreciate that. There is an angry power metal band out there. Like when you think of power metal, it's very uplifting. It makes you feel good. It pumps you up. And Nevermore does all of that too, but through an angrier channel.
They got one of the definite best guitarists ever. It was Jeff Loomis. Holy shit.
And didn't he join Arch Enemy?
He is an Arch Enemy. Slumming an Arch Enemy.
There you go.
Yeah, my issue with Nevermore was always I loved World Dane, in Sanctuary, and at the time, the problem with Nevermore always was a little bit. This isn't Sanctuary, which is kind of a crappy thing to say. But I felt there was enough of a difference in the sound that Nevermore to me sounded very much like a '90s metal band. Sanctuary had very much an '80s metal sound to it. There was enough of a difference in the songwriting, just the sound, the production they were using, stuff that I never could quite get into Nevermore. They were very, very popular at the time. They were a big name band for Century Media for years. But yeah, there was just something about the way they did the songwriting that it didn't click. It was very analogous to me of when Messiah Marklin left Candlemass and did the Memento Mori thing. Yeah. It's like you still have this great singer, and you still got some other really talented guys in the band, but somewhere in that transition, you've lost some important part of the chemistry, and it just won't quite click for me anymore. The one exception was the one Marty mentioned, Dead Heart in a Dead World. It's I like that album a lot. I haven't played it in ages, but that one, I felt like the songs really stood out, really shone nicely. But yeah, Nevermore was one of those bands. Everybody would be like, "Oh, you must like Nevermore," and I'd be like, "No, not really. I don't have to like them. There's something about their sound I could not ever quite digest. I very much associate them with the way heavy metal changed in the early mid '90s, and kind of in a direction I just didn't like. Not as bad as that.
Is that how you feel about this album too?
No, that album just sucks.
All right, Alan, you're up.
Okay, what do we got left here? Starting to get to the bottom of the stack.
I got 4 more.
You got 4 more. I've got 3.
I've got like 10 more, but we can breeze through them.
That's okay. This one, I'm pretty. This band. This is one of those that's kind of iffy whether it was really Century Media or not. If so, I think it's the only one they did for Century Media. It's the Blind Guardian live set. And as far as it's not
Virgin Records. Virgin Records.
They were signed to Virgin. This one, everywhere I look, has Century Media tied to it really closely.
Great live album. Fucking great.
It's an extremely good 2-album live set. And it's kind of the last, it has a lot of the essential stuff you need from throughout the band's career. And I don't think this was the only thing I could see that was even close to being a proper Century Media release for the band.
Wasn't the Night at the Opera Century Media release too?
No. No, and that
seems like I got a promo for that from Century Media.
I got a promo of Nightfall in Middle Earth from Century Media back in the day.
They licensed that.
They licensed those, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Licensed from Virgin.
This may technically still count as that, but it deserves a shout. Again, with a lot of these things, Century Media licensed, Virgin had no distribution, stateside. If you bought this album, you bought the Century Media press of it. Absolutely. Yep. But great live album.
You couldn't get them over here, right? Until Century Media reissued it all over here. So Nuclear Blast did it. They bought all the licenses from Century Media and put them out there again.
Yeah, when those early Blind Guardian albums came out, you went to the local indie store, you gave them $30, you waited 4 to 5 weeks, and you took whichever album they could get their mitts on. They had a bitch of a time getting stuff like that into the U.S. There was only one distributor in the U.S. that carried Blind Guardian titles forever.
The cool thing about those Blind Guardian presses too is they all dropped at the same time, pretty much. Like everything came out at the same time as Nightfall and Middle Earth. So if you liked that new album, you could go and buy all of the rest of them all at the same time, and they were all at Best Buy. Best Buy carried all of that Century Media stuff. So
Best Buy, and that's worth noting.
I had pulled this one out to show as my Blind Guardian for the end of the licensing part, but
they're such a great fucking band. They've had a few missteps, but I mean, any band that's a legacy band that's been doing it for years are gonna. I mean, it's impossible to. I mean, all fans want every album to be great, but it's impossible to hold musicians to that standard. I mean, sometimes you're just not on par, and it's just the way it goes.
That what you said there, Matt, about Best Buy is worth pointing out. That Best Buy, in their early days, always had really strong ties to these sort of smaller record labels like Century Media. I used to go into Best Buy in 1994, 1995. You could go in and buy Unleashed Shadows of the Deep off the shelf. It was just sitting there waiting for you.
Best Buy always carried Century Media, Metal Blade, and Earache releases. They never had Nuclear Blast, but they had the other big three, and you could get Nuclear Blast through Blockbuster Music at the time when Blockbuster had a music store for a couple of years. But that was hard stuff to find, was the Nuclear Blast stuff. But a big chunk of the CDs that I cut my teeth on were from Best Buy, believe it or not.
No, it's crazy to think of for folks that didn't grow up in that era, because Best Buy hasn't sold music of any kind in ages. But
a couple of decades at least.
They would even get stuff in from smaller labels. I got Therians of Darkness was like on some weird label like Craze or Maze or something, and walked into a Best Buy and it's just sitting there on the shelf for $12.99 with right next to the whatever was popular in the mid '90s. They carried
Sam Goody.
it was a big deal for metalheads.
Sam Goody was a good place to go for a nuclear blast. I remember finding stuff there at the mall. Yep.
We got a Sam Goody up here in Traverse City for maybe 6 months, and they were fucking terrible. Absolutely
Never had Sam Goody close by, so I never got to try that one.
We had one at my local mall when I was in high school, living in suburb of Chicago. So
we had Tape World and Camelot Music, and then it switched over to FYE.
Yep.
Camelot Music were fucking, I love that store. That's like where I cut my teeth on all this cool shit. They had everything. It was great. Anyway, I'm next. Okay, 1991, where thrash metal and death metal were starting to converge, and death metal was starting to overrun the market. We have Demolition Hammer's Tortured Existence. This album is fucking brutal. As far as thrash goes, it is about as thrashy as you can be without being death metal, but still, you could tell there was a bit of a proto-death undertone seeping into the sound of this stuff. This album is just absolutely crushing. And I was getting so into death metal when this came out. It really took me quite a bit to get through the vocals. I mean, the vocals are great. They're perfect for this style of music, but I wanted the death rattle, But, over the years, this thing holds up as a crusher. And the album that came after it, Epidemic of Violence, I think is the name of that one.
Yeah.
Great follow-up. And their third album, Time Bomb, was a turd. That's about all I can say about that.
The chat's been waiting for Demolition Hammer for almost since we started, so I'm glad it was on your list.
Yeah, that was actually going to be the next one I was going to show too, Tortured Existence. But yeah, I mean this band has been touring like before COVID. They were touring.
They sound great. I just earlier last week I watched a live thing they did at some festival overseas. Holy fuck, it's just absolutely crushing. They were
See,
great.
when the first time I saw them was at MDF, and they sounded great. And then I saw them at the Netherlands Death Fest, and they sounded like ass because
Really?
they were in a huge auditorium, and all you could hear were those triggers. And I hate the sound of loud triggers in a huge room. They drive me crazy because they don't sound good. And then the third time I saw them was at the Metal Fest in Atlanta, and they killed it, wiped the floor with it, and it was great. So
Right on.
fantastic band. So two out of three, not bad.
Not bad.
No, my turn again. All right, let's go with this is one I know nobody picked, nobody at all. But in 2000, 2001, I was really big into the electronic metal hybrid crap that was all over the place. Much thanks to Datumsgaard's 666 International at the time. Yep. But I was a huge fan of Amgod by And Oceans.
That band never clicked for me.
And I know they probably didn't, and they didn't click with a lot of people, but they were always like this really weird avant-garde symphonic metal band. And then they did this album, which was really going for that industrial black metal thing that was really popular because of Datumsgaard and Aberum and Thorns and like so many other things were popping out. So they kind of changed their sound for this album. And man, I listened to this thing like crazy. Granted, I was doing a lot of drugs at the time, but this album is still kind of a favorite of mine because I just listen to this thing like crazy, and it's really catchy. It's got a lot of good riffs and hooks to it, and even though it's really cheesy, they're all earworms. They just get in your head. And how can you go wrong with a song title called Intelligence is Sexy?
Well, duh.
Yeah.
So there you go, man. And Oceans. And if you have not heard it, I urge everybody to listen to their new album that came out last year. They're back to being in the symphonic black metal sphere, and it's fantastic. Nobody ever talked about that new And Oceans album that dropped last year. Wasn't on Century Media, but it is well worth checking out. So there you go. And Oceans, boom.
It's a band I've always heard people praise and just have never checked out. Never got around to it. Oh yeah, sure. We'll do this one. This is too new to really say it's a favorite of the label all time. But again, I wanted something newer to highlight that Century Media still puts out pretty good stuff. And since you mentioned And Oceans isn't on Century Media, a band that was recently signed to them and put out a real banger was Bewitcher. They've done a couple of other things, but yeah, got this album.
Cool.
A little bit of a lark, but it really impressed me. I've played it a lot over the past few months since it was released. We'll see how it ages, but really fun style. Very, very aggressive. It's speed metal. You're supposed to just have fun, bang your head to it. It works very well, but yeah, it's pretty tight. From what I understand, their previous releases were pretty good, but this one most people seem to agree this one's a big step forward for them. And it's been a little hard finding it in the US. It's through Century Media, but apparently they do something with Century Media UK, and the Century Media UK titles are not getting imported very well, at least at the moment. So it's been a little hard to get it through some channels in the States. But yeah, maybe this will be one of the future classics on Century Media. We'll see.
Yeah, not familiar at all with that band. It's too new. It's too new for this old head.
It's I kind of wanted to pick something just because when I was looking at my stack, yeah, I've got a lot of 25-year-old CDs here, but it's I think that deserves a shout out. Just that the label is still going strong.
Man, when I pulled a lot of these CDs off of my shelf, I got such an allergy attack because they're so old.
All right. Yep. I'm next.
Marty, what you got here as we near the end?
This is my last death metal album to show, but this is my favorite by this band, Bloodbath, Nightmares Made Flesh. This has got, I know it started off with Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth. He started out with the band. It was a drunken side project from him and Dan Swano and Blackheim from Catatonia, and Jonas Rensk from Catatonia. But this album, Peter Tägtgren took over. Michael had touring shit going on, so Pete Tägtgren, I'm sorry, sang on this album. I'm starting to get a little drunk. Sorry, folks. This album is a fucking crushing album. Absolutely crushing. And alone, the song Bastard Son of God is second best Bloodbath song next to Blasting the Virgin Born off that EP, that 10-inch they put out. But anyway, this is absolutely great Swedish throwback death metal. Everybody knows Bloodbath, but this is my favorite by them for sure.
I love all that Bloodbath shit. I'm surprised I didn't pick one of theirs out actually, but every Bloodbath album is good. They're all well worth listening.
My least favorite is Fathomless Mastery, but it's still good.
Yeah. And even with Nick Holmes in the band now, I mean, Bloodbath is responsible for Paradise Lost bringing the growls back to their sound, which they needed, and they sound. I mean, he sounds great in Bloodbath. I know a lot of people still are prejudiced against anything Paradise Lost, but I think the last two albums they did were fantastic. So
yeah. Matt.
Oh, it's me? Well, since I was already on that topic, let's jump into, in my opinion, is part of the last era of the Century Media that we all knew and grew up with and loved. I think it can all, around this year, maybe the year after, is pretty much bookended here with the release of The Plague Within.
It's a great album.
Paradise Lost.
Good album.
Because it wasn't too long after this is when Century Media was sold to Sony Music, and Sony Music, huge multinational billion-dollar company, Century Media is now technically a major label.
Yep.
And that is the main reason why Paradise Lost left Century Media at this point. It wasn't because they, didn't like the people they were working with. They just didn't want to work with a major record label again. So that's why they went to Nuclear Blast. And this is really a very important Paradise Lost album to me, especially just because it's the one that reminded me that they still existed, and I didn't know that they were back as a metal band for years and years and years until good friends of mine in Atlanta were like, oh no, dude, listen to the new one. Like, check this out. And I fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the band all over again.
Great album.
All because of The Plague Within. Fantastic album. So,
absolutely. No arguments here.
I got to catch up on the more recent Paradise Lost stuff.
Dude, I will teach you.
I've watched the deep dive. I'm ready to begin. I've just got 137 different things on the to listen to list.
He will gently.
Do you still need guidance with Voivod? Because I know that was on your homework list as well, Professor.
I've been working on the Voivod.
All right.
I got half my creator homework done.
Good to know.
All right, Alan.
All right, next one I want to mention, it's another one I do not own a copy of anymore, sad to say, but it's worth a shout out, is Angel Dust's Bleed. Most people think of Angel Dust as one of those kind of tier 2 German bands from the 1980s. They made 2 albums that have a good, cult following. They were never, on the same tier as, Halloween or Running Wild or anything like that. They were on one of the smaller labels. I don't remember which one off the top of my head. So they didn't get a whole lot of, distribution or anything back then. They made their 2 albums. They went away. No big surprise. What was surprising was they showed back up in the mid to late 90s with new lineup. I think there may have only been one original member that carried over, and put out some pretty good albums for a while. And Bleed, I think, was the strongest album. It came out around 98, 99 on Century Media. They had a little different sound. They were very much not going for the big, epic, galloping, happy style that European power metal had very much, morphed into by that time period. It's a lot more mid-paced material. One of the noticeable things was they had a very strong keyboard presence, but not a pervasive keyboard presence. They were in the background. They were used to good effect. They were used very tastefully. In a sense, in that regard, it was reminiscent of the way Nocturnus, was able to use a lot of their keyboards. That it really, brought the music up a level without taking over the music. And Bleed just had some really good songs, but it also had a little bit more of a darker, slightly morose tone to it. Something you didn't associate with, all the Hammerfall albums and Stradivarius with their happy rainbows and dolphins on the covers and all that shit Stradivarius did. It was a very different tone, and I really liked it. They did a few albums, and I lost track of them after about the third one, but Bleed was one of those albums that, I played it a ton back in the day, and at some point, it just got buried by time and dust, and when I had to do a massive CD clean out, it looks like it was in the box that got shipped, which a little sad. It's not, not to make it bigger than it is. It's not an A+ all-time classic heavy metal album, but it was a very strong release, and it had a pretty unique sound to it. It was just another good example of Century Media trying different bands at a time when everybody was, running to grab the next Hammerfall clone. Century Media gave Angel Dust some room to really breathe and try a different flavor of power metal, and they did a very nice job on it.
Nice. Next up is me, I guess. And this might be something that surprises some people, but I don't really care. This is a band from the Netherlands, and they started off as a very average death doom band. They ended up getting Annika Van, I can't say her last name, but this is Gathering How to Measure a Planet. It was kind of a struggle to choose which of the first 3 with her is Mandelion, Nighttime Birds, which is fucking great, and this. are my favorites, but I went to this one because it's a 2 CD set, and the second CD has got a song on it. I don't know which one it is, but it's a song about Mozart. And every time I hear the song, it brings me to tears. It is so passionate, so emotional. Something about that song. Her voice is purely angelic. I love this band. I love this band with Annika in the band, and they maintained Mandy Lion was a very heavy, very metal album, but with her angelic voice on it. It really did a lot of different things, I think, and really fit the growing and progressing Century Media catalog quite well. But this double album is fucking great. As they went on, they maybe got a little less metal, a little more, I don't want to say alternative, but they started incorporating lots of different musical styles. But this album is great, and the second disc in particular, holy shit, just song after song, it just pulls at the heartstrings for me for some reason. Saw them live at Metal Fest and was completely enchanted. It was amazing. Totally great. Amazing band. What do you guys think?
I have not heard that record since it came out, and I hated it when I
love it.
heard it when it came out. But I was so balls deep in other stuff at that time. I couldn't appreciate The Gathering then. I like The Gathering. I think they're a fine band, but they're one of those bands that just has never really connected with me. I find that Annik's voice, while it's a very good voice, it seems like it's just always like high octane like the whole time, especially on Mandy Lion. Yeah, that album, it's just nonstop, like high octane, high note.
At that point she was really young and new to and she just did not have the dynamics yet. But
that's kind of where I checked out. I mean, I always really liked the earlier stuff. I love the album Always. She wasn't in the band at all. That's when they were still a Death Doom band. So I mean, that was my Gathering, was that era. So I never went much further than Mandy Lion, and I got How to Measure a Planet as a promo from Century Media, and it just wasn't my thing. This wasn't my thing.
It's a hole punch, baby.
That's probably that. You might have bought that at Music Express.
No, I got that
where I sold my copy years ago.
I got it from the label.
But I mean, I'd be willing to give it another chance. I mean, whatever I didn't like when I was 19 years old doesn't hold much weight today. But that's just my history with The Gathering.
Right on. No, it's definitely an acquired taste. What do you think, Alan?
I like that era, that post-Mandy Lion era of The Gathering. It's very pretty music.
It is.
Yeah, I like her voice a lot. The one I listened to, Nighttime Birds.
That's a great album. Great fun. I had a real hard time choosing that one or this one, but because the tear jerker, the waterworks started on that one song every fucking time. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's not. I didn't keep up with them after How to Measure a Planet, so
they put out some good albums after that too.
It's just another band that you can only listen to so many, and that one I just didn't keep up with. But I saw them at that same Milwaukee Metal Fest, and she just had that whole room eating out of the palm of her hand for that entire set. It was almost funny to watch all these big, metal guys with their jackets and Liberty spikes and everything else, and everyone's just sitting there swaying and swinging through that.
We were too. Set. We were drunk as shit, and I remember, the beautiful music coming off the stage, and the guy standing in front of us had a Jesus is a cunt cradle of filled shirt on. It just seemed like such a weird fucking mix of people.
It really was. It was one of those instances where you figure just like oh good grief, this crowd's going to eat that band alive. They're much too happy. They're much too nice and. No, everybody in that room.
They were down.
Everybody just loved them to death. They were one of the big hits of that Metal Fest. Absolutely.
Yep. She was wearing a sparkly little dress that acted like a disco ball. It was amazing.
Yep.
So if I wanted to revisit The Gathering again, where would you guys say I should go? Should I try Nighttime Birds? Would I like that one better than
I think it's a great album.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like Mandy Lion too, but of the three first ones with her, it was the most raw. I mean, you could tell she was fresh to the game. And I don't know if she really had any experience singing in any other band before that. I don't know. But It's a great album, but Nighttime Birds is more refined. The songs are really strong. She sounds amazing on it.
Better than how she sounds on Mandelion.
I think she's a little more controlled. And on this one here, I mean, they started experimenting with other musical styles as well. So in this, there's a lot of music here. Like I said, it's 2 full CDs. So definitely some good stuff. Check it on Spotify. I'm sure it's there.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I'll give The Gathering another chance. I should. I'm a grown-ass man. I should.
You are. All right, here we go. Matt.
All right. Well, we are nearing the end of everything here. And since Ben is arguing with a guy about Century Black stuff in the comments, I'm going to show an album that I thought was a Century Black release, but everything I've seen, apparently this is a Century Media release. I could have sworn this was released by Head Not Found, but maybe Discogs is wrong. But Oliver, Nadin's Madrigal.
Great fucking album. I hated that thing when it came out. It sounded so shitty, but man, the music is...
I did too. I hated this the first time I heard it. It was just all caustic noise, but... You know, once I got used to that kind of stuff, this album really, really dug in.
The music is great.
I'm hard pressed to disagree with my own opinion here when I say that this is the best raw Norwegian black metal album that's ever been made.
Yeah,
I think this
smokes my favorite, but that's a great record.
I think this smokes everything that Darkthrone did back then. I think it smokes everything. I mean, Ulver came in and did the nastiest black metal album. And then they said, fuck you to the game and went a completely different direction.
Which was the whole album was one big fuck you to the label and everybody. I mean, that was one of the most controversial albums of the decade.
I mean, Century Media paid them a ridiculous amount of money to record what they thought was going to be the next, you know, In the Nightside Eclipse or whatever. And what they gave them was like a really painful listen. This album hurts to listen to.
Oh yeah.
But when you get past that, you know, there's some great songwriting on here. There's great riffs on here. And even though it sounds like it was recorded in the middle of the woods, it wasn't, but that was the rumor at the time.
Because it came with
I mean, they got something crazy like $10,000 to record that record, and they recorded it for like $250.
The number I have stuck in my head, which may not be accurate, was like $35,000. And then there were the promo shots that came out with the band, like wearing like the fancy suits and the reflective sunglasses, standing next to the hot car. And then they hand them this, completely raw, lo-fi, 8-track sounding, pile. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. When you get past that real sonic harshness, there's some really cool black metal.
And even the acoustic passages that they bleed in there, I mean, they blend so well, and it's like this beautiful acoustic guitar, and then bam, they hit you with that caustic nonsense. And I've just always liked it more than Bergtot. I think Bergtot is insanely overrated. I mean, I go to Nadin's any day of the week when I'm in the mood for black metal era Ulver, more so than I do Bergtot. And I stand by that. I think it's better than what everyone was trying to do with being dark and evil and raw and not death metal and we're Norwegian black metal. I think Ulver came in, they killed the game, and then they left the game, and I really respect them for doing that.
They literally took the money.
They moved on. They moved on. So, hails to Ulver.
They put their sweaters on and started making boring dancing music. Sorry. Hey, Alan.
Hey.
You're not going to flip me off today, are you?
Before Alan starts, I just got to say, Christoph, he brings up a good point. You know, if anyone watched The Sopranos, season 1 of The Sopranos, both the kids of Tony Soprano had Century Media posters all over their room.
Yep, Nevermore
poster. You saw Samael's Passage. You saw Rotting Christ, A Dead Poem. You saw Ulver, Nadin's Madrigal. You saw, I believe there was a Stuck Mojo poster as well.
Plus,
There
there
was a
he was
Nevermore
also
poster.
on,
And the Nevermore one
Rose.
too, yeah. And I've never been able to find out how that came to be. I can only imagine there was a stagehand that was a fan of Century Media or worked for Century Media, interned at a bunch of places and had these posters. But I've never been able to find out how those Century Media posters wound up in The Sopranos. But
You guys
I've always
remember
thought
the
that
show?
that's awesome that they were there.
You remember the show Home Improvement with Tim Allen?
Oh yeah,
The kid in one of the episodes had a sentence, a Muck T-shirt on.
yep. Sentence.
There were
When he
people
went goth for that one season.
Yeah, there were people in the marketing department of these big labels that would do that. They would try to get product placement. I mean, just like Coca-Cola does. You're going through a movie set and you see like a Coke can sitting on the kitchen table type thing. It's the same type of thing.
What were you saying? I was too busy enjoying this fine Kona beer.
I'm drinking Budweiser Hipster Tears, which are actually quite delicious.
I've been working on a beer sponsor for us.
That'd be pretty
I'm
cool.
drinking an IPA, which is not disgusting at
It's
all,
gross.
contrary to popular belief amongst my fellow YouTuber friends.
Rotten horse piss.
They're incorrect with their opinions.
All right. Alan, how you doing?
All right. Since we're starting to switch over to some of the sort of things that were Century Media-ish, one that I like a lot. If you got this album in the U.S., you got the Century Media press, just like I've got. But band was not technically signed to Century Media. They were signed to a label called Frontiers Records, and the release in question, Royal Hunt, on their album The Mission.
Oh yeah.
Didn't everybody call that Royal Cunt when it came out? I mean, I know I did. I did.
The Royal Runt.
This is a long-running band in the progressive end of the power metal spectrum. They've done a ton of good albums. They've done some pretty mediocre albums over time too. They've they've got a virtuoso keyboard player. I think it's Anderson, if I'm not getting the name wrong. That's always been kind of the brainchild behind the whole project. But they've had some incredible vocalists with DC Cooper and John West. And right around the time this one came out with The Mission, this was kind of the peak of their visibility. They had done some albums before this, but they hadn't really broken out of the hardcore prog fan base. And in more recent years, they've been on really small independent labels and stuff. It's been really hard finding their releases from the past 2 or 3, which is a shame. But right around this time, when they were getting when they were on Frontiers, distribution through Century Media in the U.S., they were really nailing it. The Mission's an incredible album, great track list. Anyone who likes the proggish end of power metal, this is worth checking out. It is not as proggy as, say, your Dream Theaters or anything. There's still a really strong sense of song on this era of Royal Hunt. They're not just sitting there wanking off, showing how fast they can play or how intricate their scales are, any of that stuff. I have no interest in that kind of style of prog power metal, but The Mission's just an excellent album. And John West, it's probably his finest hour with the band, and he did a couple of other good albums with this group, and he's done other good projects too, but this may be his best work he ever turned in. So Century Media is responsible for helping really get this band on the map and grow their fan base a lot in the US.
Great cover.
I remember that album getting a lot of hype at the time. Like I remember seeing that in a lot of advertisements, but never heard anybody talk about it until now.
I've never really heard many people talk about the band, and I'm not sure why. They've got a really good catalog of some really quality stuff. Again, DC Cooper was in the band, was the vocalist before, and he's an amazing singer. He left but came back and still sounds great. So just a band that gets overlooked. That progressive style of power metal isn't always the most popular for a lot of folks, and it may just be that folks don't feel like checking it out because it's got that prog prefix on it. Don't know.
All right, my last one. Okay, I could have picked Borknagar. I could have, but my favorite Borknagar is the first Borknagar, which doesn't have this guy on it, and he's got an amazing black metal vocal style, but what I love most about ICS Vortex is his crazy, completely unique, atypical pitch singing. And I picked Stormseeker, his solo project.
Oh,
Interesting.
This album is fucking great. And
Never heard that one.
it is basically Vortex completely unchained, doing what he does, playing guitar, writing all the songs, probably. I think it's got one of the guys from Borknagar on this album as well. But this is like some of the songs are silly, but they're all really solid, and his vocal harmony choices are fantastic. There's even some ABBA influence on this, which there's like a 70s style, the way he's structuring his vocals. I love this record. I think he's a great singer. Arcturus, his first appearance for me would be on that La Masquerade Infernale or whatever the hell that album's called. He does a song called The Dark Path, which is great.
It's not The Dark Path.
Is it? No. What's the name of that song? If you've got it close.
I do have it close. Hold on.
The song is The Dark Path, isn't it? Anyway, he will.
The Chaos Path.
The Chaos Path. I was staring into your eyes, and
Dark Path, buddy.
I was enchanted by your beauty, and that's where it came out. I know. My hero. But anyway, this album is fucking great. And if you've heard the Borknagar albums and you've never heard this solo album, check it out. I mean, there is no rough singing on this at all. It's all clean. He also does a doom band, Lamented Souls, which is maybe a pre-test for this. I mean, that's more doomy, but this is straight up. It sounds a lot like Borknagar, but the songs are just very much him doing what he does really well, and his vocals are amazing on this album. Absolutely great.
Cool. I've seen it, but yeah, I never picked it up.
Yeah.
He's he's a typical gem in the scene. I think his vocals are great.
I almost put Archaic Course on the list for tonight. Hey.
Me too, but I had to go. I like this better. I prefer this, actually.
I almost picked the Olden Domain by Borknagar, but I didn't because,
I don't like
Marty, I prefer the first album.
Yeah, I prefer Garm's vocals just sound tired on that record for some reason.
Yeah.
Alan.
Nope,
No.
Marty, Matt's turn. What is Matt?
This is a band that it kind of counts as not being a licensed album, but some people might argue with me on this one. The one and only album that Century Media released by Trouble, Plastic Greenhead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was released by some label in Europe, but they had like a dual record deal where they were signed to one label in Europe, but Century Media in the United States. And then this is a High Roller Records reissue of the Century Media release, but this is technically a Century Media release. And this was my introduction to Trouble, was through this album, and it was because of that Identity 3D compilation. And I've always really liked this album. I think it's not it's not my favorite Trouble album, but I listen to this quite often just because it was the first one that I ever heard.
Yep.
And I really love the song Opium Eater on this album.
Yep. There's a lot of good ones on that album.
It's one of my favorite. And even the title track, just Plastic Greenhead, that main title song, it's one of their best songs. The Eye is great. Flowers is great. This album just has a lot of the best Trouble songs on it.
Long Shadows Fall.
Yeah. And I think they broke up after this and they got back together, and then problems with Eric Wagner and, things happen. But great album by Trouble. And mine's signed by somebody, maybe pretending to be members of the band. I bought this used in Texas when I was there on business one day, and no idea if those are authentic signatures, but there you go. Trouble.
Yep. That's a perfect example of the Century Media adjacent, because you're right. Technically, when you look it up, they're listed as being on Bulletproof Records.
Yeah, there you go.
Nobody in this hemisphere got that through Bulletproof Records. You got it through Century Media. It was released on the exact same day in 1995 on both sides of the Atlantic. Just Century Media technically licensed it,
and Century Media does a lot of that still to this day. Like the Last Blood Incantation record, Hidden History of the Human Race, that's released through Dark Descent Records here, but in Europe and abroad, it's a Century Media release. So technically, that could have been included in favorite Century Media albums, but I consider it a Dark Descent release still.
Me too.
Yep. Yep.
So what if that's your jumping off point? What do you think of Older Trouble? Because Older Trouble is very different than that.
Absolutely. I love all Trouble. I mean, everything up to when Eric Wagner left, I like. I don't like anything they've done since he left the band, but I love. Alan, did you say this was your jump off point, or did I say that?
You did.
I'm getting a little drunk myself.
Hey, woohoo!
That was your jump off point, Matt.
No, I meant this was. I don't know if I misspoke. This was my entry point to Trouble.
I got what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I love all the Trouble stuff. I think the early albums they did on Metal Blade are fantastic. I love what's it called? The real hippie looking one. Manic Frustration. Yeah, that's probably my favorite out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I like everything pretty much until Wagner left, and I'm a big fan of the Skull. His newer band.
I've never heard a single song by the Skull.
It's good, man. If you like Plastic Greenhead, Manic Frustration, self-titled era Trouble, you would like the Skull.
Huh.
Even though it's titled after an era of Skull that sounds, or era of Trouble that sounds a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm getting tongue-tied, but I think you understand my point.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Trouble. They made that big change in style there in the '90s, but personally, I prefer that Plastic Greenhead, Manic Frustration era of Trouble over the early stuff.
My favorite.
It's just they were trying to fit in with that whole stoner rock thing and that Swedish rock thing that was kind of blending those sounds in, and they were trying to fit into that crowd, and that's fine. It's just as good as their doomier stuff, I think. Both great eras for a great band.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Alan.
All right, my last one as another one that's technically. This band, I don't think, has ever been signed to Century Media, but when this band exploded big in the United States, it was because they were getting licensed in the U.S. on Century Media. It's a controversial band. A lot of folks don't care for them. They may not be heavy enough for some folks, but I've enjoyed some of their older albums. Nightwish. This band, fair enough. But this band,
I've recently started to enjoy some of their stuff. Anyway,
they huge band for the label over the past 20 years. They basically invented a new little subcategory of this very operatic female-fronted style of power metal.
Yeah.
I've never really have heard a good label title designation for it, but I think they ran out of gas a long time ago, personally. I know a lot of folks like the newer vocalist. I think it's Floor Jansen.
She's amazing.
She's a really very good singer. I just don't know if the band has enough ideas. They just don't seem to have a whole lot of really interesting ideas anymore. But around this was the second one, Oceanborn, with Tarja on vocals, and it's just a crazy over the top, with this very loud symphonic, power metal and these crazy operatic vocals, and I dig it. Some of their albums more so than others, but this one's quite good, and a couple of the later ones, the last two with Tarja, Once and Century Child, great albums. And again, it's a style that's not going to appeal to a lot of folks, but it's another good example of Century Media having a good idea of their finger on the pulse of what was going to work. They gave this band a shot and a push in the U.S., and Lord, how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of units did they sell between this and Wishmaster and other Nightwish titles, licensing it from Spine Farm Records. You didn't get Spine Farm. Mine actually is a Spine Farm pressing, but 9 out of 10 people, when you got this, you got the Century Media version because that's what was available for most places. So, yeah, Century Media brought in a lot of good stuff, and they were very shrewd and pretty savvy on what kind of things would do well for them when they marketed it into the U.S. So, I like Nightwish. Leave me alone.
No, it's all good, man. Matt.
I really like Chameleon by Halloween.
Fuck you, Matt.
I think this is a fantastic record that is even better than Keeper of the Seven Keys, parts 1 or 2.
Well, that's not right.
It's just magic. It's magic. Alan, let's talk Halloween's Camp Chameleon. Let's talk it.
Hand it here, and I'll wipe my ass with it, and we'll talk about it all you want to.
All right.
It needs a brown streak in the middle. That cover's missing the brown streak. It's the only color not on the palette.
So are you guys done with your picks? Because I've still got 1, 2, 3. I've got 5 left that I pulled out. I can just breeze through them if you guys want to kill it.
Well, I'm done, but I don't know what Alan's got.
I'm at a good stop point. So, yeah, Matt, bring us on.
I'm just going to breeze through them really quick then.
Sure. Bring us on home with what you got left.
All right.
Look at this. Look at this comment. Of course he does.
Wrong.
I've trained him.
Yeah, wrong.
I've took his hand, much like Alan's, and led him into the Darris waters. Yes.
All right. So one band that a lot of people, I think, forget are on Century Media is Voivod. And I really, really, really love the latest Voivod album.
That's a good album. Yeah,
it's great. And a lot of people don't give Voivod a lot of due because Piggy died and he's not in the band anymore. But
Chewy's great, man. He's like
Chewy's
the perfect.
Great. This is a great
successor.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great album. Target Earth was a great album.
Yep.
The EP Post Society is great. I mean, they are just as good today as they've always been. So I just wanted to give Voivod a little shout out. The Wake is a fantastic album. Also, nobody talked about Solstice.
I've never heard that album ever.
Good album.
I don't know that Solstice.
Yeah, this isn't a Century Media pressing, but they released The Sentencing, and I think they released the album Pray. I can't recall, but this is a compilation of both those albums together. But it's classic early Death Thrash, and what's his face from Cannibal Corpse, I think, is in this band. Rob Barrett.
That was his band, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is great stuff. So I wanted to give a shout out to some Solstice. I've seen these guys live 3 times, not with Cannibal Corpse guy, but they wipe the floor every time I've seen them live. So they're still active. And then also nobody talked about I Hate God.
I'm not a fan.
I'm surprised nobody brought that one up.
I know a lot of people don't like I Hate God. I love their blown out, heroin addled Sabbath meets Black Sabbath, but played through a broken amp sound. It has a time and a place. I can only handle this stuff in certain times, but I really do like quite a bit of what I Hate God has done. So In the Name of Suffering, we got that. And then
that's a good pick.
The only like recent Century Media album I've bought, other than current Voivod stuff, I really like Imperial Triumphant. Alphaville is their debut. Yeah, their debut album on Century Media. This is just a really weird jazz infused black metal band, and they're weird as balls. But
more bands coming out in modern times that they put themselves in kooky masks, and it's almost more about their look, like Portal. I mean, that shit's crazy. It's hard to listen to, but they got kooky masks. I don't know.
Right, and I know what you're saying, and to a certain extent I agree, but I think Imperial Triumphant, even though they do wear the masks, they do have that gimmick, they are still interesting enough, and they're not just a wall of noise like Portal is. Portal is like really hard to digest.
It's
really hard
to digest,
digest,
but it's hard to listen to. Yeah,
but Imperial Triumphant's not nearly as hard to listen to because they've got a lot of interesting stuff going on. And while this is not my favorite album by Imperial Triumphant, I think that it's kind of cool that they're technically signed to a major label now. So got that. And
kooky
then
masks sell.
What's that?
Kooky masks sell records.
They do. And then the last two that I pulled out, even though they don't technically count, they are Century Black releases. But, I mean, you can't talk about Century Media without mentioning Century Black just a little bit. So you got to throw out Nemesis Divina by Satyricon.
I love that album.
I mean, it's great. And, of course, my favorite Emperor album, Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk.
Great.
I could also pull out In the Nightside Eclipse. I could pull out The Split with Enslaved. I could pull out whatever fucking Emperor album you like. I'm not going to talk about Emperor. We all know and love Emperor. But, yeah, I mean, you can't hold a torch to Nemesis.
That album is so good. They took a turn after that album, but...
Big turn. And funny story, funny anecdote about this album. When I was in Norway in 2018, I went there to go to the Inferno Fest. And I've talked to so many Norwegians there who firmly believe, without a doubt, that Mother North was actually written by Ishan and given or stolen by Satyr from Satyricon. They say, if you think about it, listen to Mother North. It sounds like an Emperor song. It does not sound like a Satyricon song. And they all firmly believed that Satyr either stole that song or was given that song by Ishan
or was influenced by Emperor. I mean, that's a thing too. He's a talented guy, you know.
Yeah. So I just thought that was a funny story, you know, because I talked to at least like 6 people who are like, oh, yeah, Mother North, that's an Ishan song. That's an Emperor song.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? I had never heard that before.
Very cool.
There you go. Those are my Century Media picks, ladies and gents.
Well, we did it. We got through this. And I got to say, thank you to all the people that stuck with us. Holy shit. We're good.
52 live viewers right now. Right on.
Right on. And we appreciate all of you, and we're going to keep doing this. So
there's been a lot of good stuff mentioned in the chat that we haven't had a chance to bring up that nobody brought to the table tonight. But yeah,
there are so many albums. I mean, Century Media has so much stuff, you know. Couldn't pull everything, even though I tried.
Oh yeah. And I tried to stick with stuff that did something for me, you know. I mean, like Tiamat, I'm late to the game on that. I've got Wild Honey and I've got Astral Sleep. You know, I've got stuff, but I never listen to them. I just never do. It's good shit. I like it, but I try to pull stuff that I had a connection with early on and just go from there. But,
right.
You know, and I was also very fortunate. I was a big Century Media fan before I started a fanzine, but like Matt said, they were one of the first 3 albums that ever started servicing me with promos during the Worm Gear era back in 95. And I appreciate that. And I got to know some of those people back then, the publicist and the merch guy. And, you know, they always struck me as an up-and-up label. Although I will say, Century Media's mail order for me has always sucked. I've
always heard bad things about their mail order.
I never had a problem with it. I've heard that ad nauseum. I never had a problem with their mail order.
This last bout, I'll never order from them again. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, they had like a $5 CD sale. I bought like 10, 13 CDs just to try them, like $5. Who cares? You know, I'm going to check these out. Broken Hope, you know, they had a whole bunch of shit in there. It took forever. I got an email like months later saying, we're out of stock on some of this stuff. We're going to send you this. We're going to send you what we have. And I never got the package. Never got it. I lost the emails. I lost the tracking numbers. I'm a shitty at that stuff. I order stuff and forget about it. When it shows up, cool. But it never came. And back in the day, I remember ordering some Grave shirts and some other shit. It took 6 months to get here. I mean, the few times I've ordered from Century Media's mail order, it's been a shit show. And the last time they fucked me out of $60. And I never got my shit. And I lost all the crap. I forgot my login information. I can't get on there and email anybody because it's not super obvious who you even fucking email, you know.
I never had a problem ordering from them when I was a 16-year-old kid. Just every catalog that came in their CDs, like, oh, what do they have? Order it. Fine. I think there was maybe only once or twice where they didn't have what I wanted. but they always had a section where you would list alternate choices.
Mhm.
So, you know, I was never screwed out of orders from them. But to be fair, I haven't ordered from them since those old days. I mean, there's so many other places to order from today.
Oh yeah.
I haven't ordered from Century Media in decades. So
My biggest distro of choice is eBay. Honestly.
eBay and Discogs is where I get most stuff. So
I'm trying to remember if I ever ordered directly from Century Media. I probably did, and I'm just not recalling it. But a lot of people, through the years, I remember hearing lots of complaints of people where their shit took forever, or they always had the, well, we're out of stock and we're sending you, these other things as replacements. It's like, well, that's not what I fucking paid for. I don't want that. Just refund me the damn money if you don't.
Yeah, that's kind of bullshit how they would do that. Like if you don't give them an alternate choice, they're just like, oh, have this Oceans of Slumber album. I don't want to listen to fucking Oceans of Slumber. I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I see the name everywhere, so here you go. We pressed 2 million of them.
Yep.
No thanks.
Well, anyway, we did it. Our longest episode and well viewed. Thank you, everybody, again for hanging out with us tonight. And we really, really appreciate it. And
this was fun, guys. This was fun.
Matt, we appreciate you hanging out with us. So you were the perfect choice for this discussion, of course. And we will get you again, sir. We will get you again for something in the future, I'm sure.
As soon as you send this video of you flushing that Halloween down the toilet.
Can we do a deep dive on Chameleon next?
As soon as you send us video footage of you flushing that down the toilet, take it out to that new pool you've got. Just let it float on over into one of those little drains that sucks up all the dead bugs and shit. And then we'll get you scheduled again.
Look how glorious they are, Alan. Just look at them.
I know you're out there in the country. That doesn't where you can smell the trees. It doesn't mean you have to listen to Red Sox and the smell of trees.
But it's Chameleon.
And it still sucks.
But anyway, folks, we will see you next week. I don't know what the topic's going to be. I don't know who's going to be here, but we'll figure something out between now and then. Alan is our visionary in that department. So we'll get it figured out. And thank you, one and all, for watching us tonight.
Everybody have a great weekend.
Take care.